Chapter 13. And next my gold. To Sand Dan Glokta, superior of Dagosca, and for his eyes alone, I am most troubled to discover that you think yourself short of both men and money. As far as soldiers are concerned, you must make do with what you have, or what you can procure. As you are already well aware, the great majority of our strength is committed in Angland. Unfortunately, a certain rebellious temper among the peasantry throughout Midland is more than occupying what remains. As to the question of funds, I fear that nothing can he spare. You will not ask again. I advise you to squeeze what you can from the spicers, from the natives, from anyone else who is to hand. Borrow and make do. Glokta. Demonstrate that resourcefulness that made you so famous in the Cantic War. I trust that you will not disappoint me. Salt Arch-Lector of His Majesty's Inquisition. Matters proceed with the greatest speed, superior, if I may say so. Since the gates to the upper city were opened, the work rate of the natives has tripled. The ditch is down below sea level across the entire peninsula, and deepening every day. Only narrow dams hold back the brine at either end, and at your order, the entire business is ready to be flooded. Visbrook sat back with a happy smile on his plump face, quite as if the whole thing had been his idea. Below them in the upper city, the morning chanting was beginning, a strange wailing that drifted from the spires of the great temple, out over Dagosca, and into every building, even here, in the audience chamber of the citadel. Kadia calls his people to prayer. Worm's lip curled at the sound. That time again already? Damn those natives and their bloody superstitions. We should never have let them back into their temple. Damn their bloody chanting. It gives me a headache, and it's worth it for that alone. Glokta grinned. If it makes Kadia happy, your headache is something I can live with. Like it or not, we need the natives, and the natives like to chant. Get used to it, is my advice. That or wrap a blanket round your head. Visbrook sat back in his chair and listened while Worms sulked. I have to admit that I find the sound rather soothing, and we cannot deny the effect the superior's concessions have had on the natives. With their help, the land walls are repaired, the gates are replaced, and the scaffolds are already being dismantled. Stone has been acquired for new parapets, but... and here's the problem. The masons refuse to work another day without money. My soldiers are on quarter pay, and morale is low. Debt is the problem, superior. I'll say it is, muttered Worms angrily. The granaries are close to capacity, and 2 new wells have been dug in the lower city at great expense, but my credit is utterly exhausted. The grain merchants are after my blood, a damn sight less keenly than every merchant in the city is after mine, I dare say. I can scarcely show my face any longer for their clamoring. My reputation is in jeopardy, superior, as if I had no larger concerns than the reputation of this dolt. How much do we owe? Worms frowned. For food, water, and general equipment, no less than 100,000. 100,000? The spicers love making money, but they hate spending it more. Ida will not come up with half so much if she even chooses to try. What about you, General? The cost of hiring mercenaries, excavating the ditch, of the repairs to the walls, of extra weapons, armor, ammunition. Visbrook puffed out his cheeks. In all, it comes to nearly 400,000 marks. It was the most Glokta could do to keep from choking on his own tongue. 500,000? A king's ransom and more besides. I doubt that Salt could provide so much, even if he had the mind, and he does not. Mendy all the time over debts a fraction of the size. Work however you can. Promise whatever you want. The money is on its way, I assure you. The general was already collecting his notes. I am doing all I can, but people are beginning to doubt that they will ever be paid. Worms was more direct. No one trusts us any longer. Without money, we can do nothing. Nothing, growled Severard. Frost slowly shook his head. Glokta rubbed at his sore eyes. A superior of the Inquisition vanishes without leaving so much as a smear behind. He retires to his chambers at night. The door is locked. In the morning, he does not answer. They break down the door and find nothing. The bed has been slept in, but there is no body. Not the slightest sign of a struggle even. Nothing, muttered Severard. What do we know? Davoust suspected a conspiracy within the city, a traitor intending to deliver Dagosca to the Gurkish. He believed a member of the ruling council was involved. It would seem likely that he uncovered the identity of this person and was somehow silenced. But who? We must turn the question on its head. If we cannot find our traitor, we must make them come to us. If they work to get the Gurkish in, we need only succeed in keeping them out. Sooner or later, they will show themselves. Risky, mumbled Frost. Risky indeed, especially for Dagosca's latest superior of the Inquisition, but we have no choices. So we wait? Asked Severard. We wait, and we look to our defenses. That and we try to find some money. Do you have any cash, Severard? I did have some. I gave it to a girl down in the slums. Ah, shame. Not really, she fucks like a madman. I'd thoroughly recommend her if you're interested. Glokta winced as his knee clicked. What a thoroughly heartwarming tale, Severard. I never had you down for a romantic. I'd sing a ballad if I wasn't so short of funds. I could ask around. How much are we talking about? Oh, not much. Say, 500,000 marks. One of the practical's eyebrows went up sharply. He reached into his pocket, dug around for a moment, pulled his hand out and opened it. A few copper coins shone in his palm. 12 bits, he said. 12 bits is all I can raise. 12,000 is all I can raise, said Magister Eider, scarcely a drop in the bucket. My guild are nervous. Business has not been good. The great majority of their assets are bound up in ventures of one kind or another. I have little cash to hand either. I dare say you have a good deal more than 12,000, but what's the difference? I doubt even you have 500,000 tucked away. There probably isn't that amount in the whole city. One would almost think they didn't like me, she snorted. Turning them out of the temple, arming the natives, then demanding money? It might be fair to say you're not their favorite person. Might it be fair to say they're after my blood? And plenty of it. I shouldn't wonder. It might, but for the time being. At least I think I have managed to convince them that you're a good thing for the city. She looked levelly at him for a moment. You are a good thing, aren't you? If keeping the Gurkish out is your priority, that is our priority, isn't it? More money wouldn't hurt, though. More money never hurts. But that's the trouble with merchants. They much prefer making it to spending it even when it's in their own best interests. She gave a heavy sigh, rapped her fingernails on the table, looked down at her hand. She seemed to consider a moment. Then she began to pull the rings from her fingers. When she had finally got them all off, she tossed them into the box along with the coins. Glokta frowned. A winning gesture, Magister, but I could not possibly. I insist, she said, unclasping her heavy necklace and dropping it into the box. I can always get more, once you've saved the city. In any case, they'll do me no good when the Gurkish rip them from my corpse, will they? She slipped her heavy bracelets off her wrists, yellow gold, studded with green gemstones. They rattled down amongst the rest. Take the jewels, before I change my mind. A man lost in the desert should take such water, as he is offered, regardless of the source. Kadia told me the very same thing. Kadia is a clever man, he is. I thank you for your generosity, Magister. Glokta snapped the lid of the box shut. The least I could do. She got up from her chair and walked to the door, her sandals hissing across the carpet. I will speak with you soon. He says he must speak with you now. What was his name? Schickel. Mortis. A banker. One more creditor, come clamoring for his money. Sooner or later I'll have to just arrest the pack of them. That will be the end of my little spending spree, but it will almost be worth it to see the looks on their faces. Glokta gave a hopeless shrug. Send him in. He was a tall man in his 50s, almost ill-looking in his gauntness, hollow-cheeked and sunken-eyed. There was a stern precision to his movements, a steady coldness to his gaze, as though he is weighing the value of all he looks at in silver marks, including me. My name is Mothis. I was informed, but I am afraid that there are no funds available at the present moment, unless you count Severad's 12 bits. Whatever debt the city has with your bank will have to wait. It will not be for much longer, I assure you, just until the sea dries up, the sky falls in, and devils roam the earth. Mothis gave a smile, if you could call it that, a neat, precise, and utterly joyless curving of the mouth. You misunderstand me, Superior Glokta. I have not come to collect a debt. For 7 years I have had the privilege of acting as the chief representative in Dagaska of the banking house of Valent and Bok. Glokta paused, then tried to sound offhand. Valent and Bok, you say? Your bank financed the Guild of Mercers, I believe. We had some dealings with that guild before their unfortunate fall from grace. I'll say you did. You owned them, from the ground up. But then we have dealings with many guilds and companies and other banks and individuals, great and small. Today I have dealings with you. Dealings of what nature? Maltis turned to the door and snapped his fingers. 2 burly natives entered, grunting, sweating, struggling under the weight of a great casket, a box of polished black wood, bound with bands of bright steel, sealed with a heavy lock. They set it down carefully on the fine carpet, wiped sweat from their foreheads, and tramped out the way they came while Glokta frowned after them. What is this? Malthus pulled a key from his pocket and turned it in the lock. He reached forward and lifted the lid of the chest. He moved out of the way carefully and precisely, so Glokta could see the contents. 150,000 marks in silver. Glokta blinked. And so it is. The coins flashed and glittered in the evening light. Flat, round silver 5-mark pieces. Not a jingling heap, not some barbarian's hoard. Neat, even stacks, held in place by wooden dowels. As neat and even as Malthus himself. The 2 porters were gasping their way back into the room, carrying between them a second box, slightly smaller than the first. They placed it on the floor and strode out, not so much as glancing at the fortune glittering in plain view beside them. Malthus unlocked the second chest with the same key, raised the lid, and stood aside. 350,000 marks in gold. Glokta knew his mouth was open, but he could not close it. Bright, clean gold, glowing yellow. All that wealth seemed almost to give off warmth, like a bonfire. It tugged at him, dragged at him, pulled him forward. He took a hesitant step, in fact, before he stopped himself. Great big golden 50-mark pieces, neat, even stacks, just as before. Most men would never in their lives see such coins. Few men indeed can ever have seen so many. Malthus reached into his coat and pulled out a flat leather case. He placed it carefully on the table and unfolded it. Once, twice, 3 times, 1/2 of 1,000,000 marks in polished stones. There they lay on the soft black leather, on the hard brown tabletop, burning with all the colors under the sun. 2 large handfuls, perhaps, of multicolored glittering gravel. Glokta stared down at them, numb, and sucked at his gums. Magister Ida's jewels seemed suddenly rather quaint. In total, I have been ordered by my superiors to advance to you, Sandan Glokta, superior of Dagaska, the sum of precisely 1,000,000 marks. He unrolled a heavy paper. You will sign here. Glokta stared from one chest to another and back. His left eye gave a flurry of twitches. Why? To certify that you received the money. Glokta almost laughed. Not that. Why the money? He flailed one hand at it all. Why all this? It would appear that my employers share your concern that Dagaska should not fall to the Gurkish. More than that I cannot tell you. Cannot, or will not. Cannot, will not. Glokta frowned at the jewels, at the silver, at the gold. His leg was throbbing dully. All that I wanted, and far more. But banks do not become banks by giving money away. If this is a loan, what is the interest? Malthus flashed his icy smile again. My employers would prefer to call it a contribution to the defense of the city. There is one condition, however, which is, it may be that in the future, a representative of the banking house of Valent and Bok will come to you requesting favors. It is the most earnest hope of my employers that, if and when that time comes, you will not disappoint them. 1,000,000 marks worth of favors, and I place myself in the power of a most suspect organization. An organization whose motives I do not begin to understand. An organization that, until recently, I was on the point of investigating for high treason. But what are my options? Without money, the city is lost, and I am finished. I needed a miracle, and here it is, sparkling before me. A man lost in the desert must take such water as is offered. Malthus slid the document across the table. Several blocks of neat writing, and a space for a name. For my name, not at all unlike a paper of confession, and prisoners always sign their confessions. They are only offered when there is no choice. Glokta reached for the pen, dipped it in the ink, wrote his name in the space provided. That concludes our business. Maltis rolled up the document, smoothly and precisely. He slipped it carefully into his coat. My colleagues and I are leaving Dagaska this evening. A great deal of money to contribute to the cause, but precious little confidence in it. Valent and Balk are closing their offices here, but perhaps we will meet in Adua, once this unfortunate situation with the Gurkish is resolved. The man gave his mechanical smile one more time. Don't spend it all at once. And he turned on his heel and strode out, leaving Glokta alone with his monumental windfall. He shuffled over to it, breathing hard, and stared down. There was something obscene about all that money. Something disgusting. Something frightening, almost. He snapped shut the lids of the two chests. He locked them with trembling hands. He shoved the key in his inside pocket. He stroked the metal bindings of the two boxes with his fingertips. His palms were greasy with sweat. I am rich. He picked up a clear-cut stone the size of an acorn and held it up to the window between finger and thumb. The dim light shone back at him through the many facets, 1,000 brilliant sparks of fire blue, green, red, white. Glokta did not know much about gemstones, but he was reasonably sure that this one was a diamond. I am very, very rich. He looked back at the rest, sparkling on the flat piece of leather. Some of them were small, but many were not. Several were larger than the one he held in his hand. I am immensely, fabulously wealthy. Imagine what one could do with so much money. Imagine what one could control, perhaps. With this much, I can save the city. More walls, more supplies, more equipment, more mercenaries. The Gurkish, thrown back from Dagaska in disarray. The Emperor of Gurkhul, humbled. Who would have thought it? Sand Dan Glokta, once more the hero. He rolled the shining little pebbles around with a fingertip, lost in thought. But so much spending in so little time could raise questions. My faithful servant Practical Vitari would be curious, and she would make my noble master the Archlector curious. One day, I beg for money. The next I spend it as if it burns. I was forced to borrow, Your Eminence. Indeed. How much? No more than 1,000,000 marks. Indeed? And who would lend such a sum? Why, our old friends at the banking house of Valent and Balk, Your Eminence, in return for unspecified favors, which they might call in at any moment. Of course, my loyalty is still beyond question. Body found floating by the docks, he pushed his hand absently through the cold, hard, glittering stones, and they tickled pleasantly at the skin between his fingers. Pleasant, but perilous. We must still tread carefully, more carefully than ever. Chapter 14. Fear. It was a long way to the edge of the world. Of that there could be no doubt. A long and a lonely and a nervous way. The sight of the corpses on the plain had worried everyone. The passing riders had made matters worse. The discomforts of the journey had in no way diminished. Jezzel was still constantly hungry, usually too cold, often wet through, and would probably be saddle-sore for the rest of his days. Every night he stretched out on the hard and lumpy ground, dozed and dreamed of home, only to wake to the pale morning more tired and aching than when he lay down. His skin crawled and chafed and stung with the unfamiliar feeling of dirt, and he was forced to admit that he had begun to smell almost as vile as the others. It was enough altogether to make a civilized man run mad. And now, to add to all of this, there was the constant nagging of danger. From that point of view, the terrain was not on Jezzel's side. Hoping to shake off any pursuers, Bayaz had ordered them away from the river a few days earlier. The ancient road wound now through deep scars in the plain, through rocky gullies, through shadowy gorges, alongside chattering streams in deep valleys. Yizal began to think on the endless, grinding flatness almost with nostalgia. At least out there one did not look at every rock and shrub and fold in the ground and wonder whether there was a crowd of bloodthirsty enemies behind it. He had chewed his fingernails almost until the blood ran. Every sound made him bite his tongue and spin around in his saddle, clutching at his steels, staring for a murderer, who turned out to be a bird in a bush. It was not fear, of course, for Jezal Dan Luthar, he told himself, would laugh in the face of danger. An ambush, or a battle, or a breathless pursuit across the plain, these things, he imagined, he could have taken in his stride. But this endless waiting, this mindless tension, this merciless rubbing by of slow minutes, was almost more than he could stand. It might have helped had there been someone with whom he could share his unease, but, as far as companionship went, little had changed. The cart still rolled along the cracked old road while Kai sat grim and silent on top. Bayaz said nothing but for the occasional lecture on the qualities of great leadership, qualities which seemed markedly absent in himself. Longfoot was off scouting out the route, only appearing every day or two to let them know how skillfully he was doing it. Pharaoh frowned at everything, as though it was her personal enemy, and at Jezal most of all. It sometimes seemed, her hands never far from her weapons. She spoke rarely, and then only to Nine Fingers, to snarl about ambushes, or covering their tracks better, or the possibilities of being followed. The Northman himself was something of a puzzle. When Jezal had first laid eyes on him, gawping at the gate of the Agrient, he had seemed less than an animal. Out here in the wild, though, the rules were different. One could not simply walk away from a man one disliked, then do one's best to avoid him, belittle him in company, and insult him behind his back. Out here you were stuck with the companions you had, and being stuck with him, Jezal had come slowly to realize that Nine Fingers was just a man, after all, a stupid and a thuggish, and a hideously ugly one, no doubt. No, as far as wit and culture went, he was a cut below the lowliest peasant in the fields of the Union, but Jezal had to admit that out of all the group, the Northman was the one he had come to hate least. He had not the pomposity of Bayaz, the watchfulness of Quai, the boastfulness of Longfoot, or the simple viciousness of Pharaoh. Jezal would not have been ashamed to ask a farmer his opinion on the raising of crops, or a smith his opinion on the making of armor, however dirty, ugly, or low-born they might have been. Why not consult a hardened killer on the subject of violence? I understand that you have led men in battle, Jezal tried as his opening. The Northman turned his dark, slow eyes on him. More than once. And fought in duels. Aye, he scratched at the ragged scars on his stubbly cheek. I didn't come to look like this from a wobbly hand at shaving. If your hand was that wobbly, you would choose perhaps to grow a beard. Nine Fingers chuckled. Jezal was almost used to the sight now. It was still hideous, of course, but smacked more of good-natured ape than crazed murderer. I might at that, he said. Jezal thought about it a moment. He did not wish to make himself appear weak, but honesty might earn the trust of a simple man. If it worked with dogs, why not with Northmen? I myself, he ventured, have never fought in a full-blooded battle. You don't say. No, truly. My friends are in Angland now, fighting against Bethod and his savages. Nine Fingers' eyes swiveled sideways. I mean, that is to say, fighting against Bethod. I would be with them myself, had not Bayaz asked me to come on this venture. Their loss is our gain. Jezal looked sharply across. From a subtler source, that might almost have sounded like sarcasm. Bethod started this war, of course. A most dishonorable act of unprovoked aggression on his part. You'll get no argument from me on that score. Bethod's got a gift when it comes to starting wars. The only thing he's better at is the finishing of Jezal laughed. The laughter stuttered out in Jezal's throat. He was almost sure that had been irony, and it made him think for a moment. Was Nine Fingers looking at him now, and behind that scarred, that plotting, that battered mask, thinking, what a fool? Could it be that Bayaz had been right? That there was something to be learned from this Northman after all? There was only one way to find out. What's a battle like? He asked. Battles are like men. No two are ever quite the same. No two are ever quite the same. How do you mean? Imagine waking up at night to hear a crashing and a shouting, scrambling out of your tent into the snow with your trousers falling down, to see men all around you killing one another. Nothing but moonlight to see by, no clue who are enemies and who are friends. No weapon to fight with. Confusing, said Jezal, no doubt. Or imagine crawling in the mud, between the stomping boots, trying to get away but not knowing where to go, with an arrow in your back and a sword cut across your arse, squealing like a pig and waiting for a spear to stick you through. A spear you won't even see coming. Painful, agreed Jazel. Very. Or imagine standing in a circle of shields no more than 10 strides across, all held by men roaring their loudest. There's just you and one other man in there, and that man's won a reputation for being the hardest bastard in the north, and only one of you can leave alive. Murmured Jezel. That's right. You like the sound of any of those? Jezal did not, and Nine Fingers smiled. I didn't think so, and honestly, nor do I. I've been in all kind of battles and skirmishes and fights. Most of them started in chaos, and all of them ended in it, and not once did I not come near to shitting myself at some point. You, the Northman chuckled. Fearlessness is a fool's boast, to my mind. The only men with no fear in them are the dead, or the soon-to-be-dead, maybe. Fear teaches you caution and respect for your enemy, and to avoid sharp edges used in anger. All good things in their place, believe me. Fear can bring you out alive, and that's the very best anyone can hope for from any fight. Every man who's worth a damn feels fear. It's the use you make of it that counts. Be scared, that's your advice. My advice would be to find a good woman and steer well clear of the whole bloody business, and it's a shame no one told me the same 20 years ago. He looked sideways at Jezel. But if, say, you're stuck out on some great wide plain in the middle of nowhere and can't avoid it, there's 3 rules I'd take to a fight. First, always do your best to look the coward, the weakling and the fool. Silence is a warrior's best armor, the saying goes. Hard looks and hard words have never won a battle yet, but they've lost a few. Look the fool, eh? I see. Jezel had built his whole life around trying to appear the cleverest, the strongest, the most noble. It was an intriguing idea, that a man might choose to look like less than he was. Second, never take an enemy lightly, however much the dullard he seems. Treat every man like he's twice as clever, twice as strong, twice as fast as you are, and you'll only be pleasantly surprised. Respect costs you nothing, and nothing gets a man killed quicker than confidence. Never underestimate the foe. A wise precaution. Jezel was beginning to realize that he had underestimated this Northman. He wasn't half the idiot he appeared to be. Third, watch your opponent as close as you can, and listen to opinions if you're given them. But once you've got your plan in mind, you fix on it and let nothing sway you. Time comes to act. You strike with no backward glances. Delay is the parent of disaster, my father used to tell me. And believe me, I've seen some disasters. No backward glances, muttered Jezel, nodding slowly to himself. Of course. Nine Fingers puffed out his pitted cheeks. There's no replacement for seeing it and doing it, but master all that and you're halfway to beating anyone, I reckon. Halfway? What about the other half? The Northman shrugged. Luck. Ta. I don't like this, growled Pharaoh, frowning up at the steep sides of the gorge. Jezel wondered if there was anything in the world she did like. You think we're followed? Asked Bayaz. You see anyone? How could I see anyone from down here? That's the point. Good ground for an ambush, muttered Nine Fingers. Jezel looked around him, nervously. Broken rocks, bushes, scrubby trees. The ground was full of hiding places. Well, this is the route that Longfoot picked for us, grumbled Bayaz. And there's no purpose in hiring a cleaner if you're going to swab the latrines yourself. Where the hell is that damn navigator anyway? Never around when you want him. Only turns up to eat and boast for hours on end. If you knew how much that bastard cost me, damn it. Numb it. Nine Fingers pulled his horse up and clambered stiffly down from his saddle. A fallen tree trunk, wood cracked and gray, lay across the gorge, blocking the road. I don't like this. Pharaoh shrugged her bow from her shoulder. Neither do I, grumbled Nine Fingers, taking a step towards the fallen tree. But you have to be real. That's far enough. The voice echoed back and forth around the valley, brash and confident. Quay hauled on the reins and brought the cart to a sudden halt. Geza looked along the lip of the gorge, his heart thumping in his mouth. He saw the speaker now, a big man dressed in antique leather armor, sitting carelessly on the edge of the drop with one leg dangling, his long hair flapping softly in the breeze. A pleasant and a friendly-looking man, as far as Jezel could tell at this distance, with a wide smile on his face. My name is Phineas, a humble servant of the Emperor Cabrian. Cabrian, shouted Bayaz. I heard he'd lost his reason. He's got some interesting ideas, Phineas shrugged, but he's always seen us right. Let me explain matters where all around you. A serious-seeming man with a short sword and shield stepped out from behind the dead tree trunk. 2 more appeared, and then 3 more, creeping out from behind the rocks, behind the bushes, all with serious faces and serious weapons. Jezal licked his lips. He would laugh in the face of danger, of course, but now it came to it, nothing seemed at all amusing. He looked over his shoulder. More men had come from behind the rocks they had passed a few moments before, blocking the valley in the other direction. Nine Fingers folded his arms. Just once, he murmured. I'd like to take someone else by surprise. There's a couple more of us, shouted Phineas. Up here with me. Good hands with bows and ready with arrows. Jezal saw their outlines now against the white sky, the curved shapes of their weapons. So you see that you'll be going no further down this road. Bayaz spread his palms. Perhaps we can come to some arrangement that suits us both. You need only name your price, and your money is no good to us, old man. And I'm deeply wounded by the assumption. We're soldiers, not thieves. We have orders to find a certain group of people, a group of people wandering out in the middle of nowhere, far from the traveled roads. An old bald bastard with a sickly-looking boy, some stuck-up Union fool, a scarred whore, and an ape of a Northerner. You've seen a crowd that might fit that description. If I'm the whore, shouted Nine Fingers. Who's the Northerner? Jezal winced. No jokes. Please, no jokes. But Phineas only chuckled. They didn't tell me you were funny. Reckon that's a bonus. At least until we kill you. Where's the other one, eh? The navigator? No idea, growled Bayaz. Unfortunately. If anyone dies, it should be him. Don't take it too hard. We'll catch up with him later. And Phineas laughed an easy laugh, and the men around them grinned and fingered their weapons. So if you'd be good enough to give your arms to those fellows ahead of you, we can get you trussed up and start back towards Darmium before nightfall. And when we get there, Phineas gave a happy shrug. Not my business. I don't ask questions of the Emperor, and you don't ask questions of me. That way, no one gets skinned alive. Do you take my meaning, old man? Your meaning is hard to miss, but I am afraid that Darmium is quite out of our way. What are you? Called Phineas, soft in the head. The nearest man stepped forward and grabbed hold of Bayaz's bridle. That's enough of that, he growled. Jezal felt that horrible sucking in his guts. The air around Bayaz's shoulders trembled like the hot air above a forge. The foremost of the men frowned, opened his mouth to speak. His face seemed to flatten. Then his head broke open, and he was suddenly snatched away as though flicked by a giant unseen finger. He had not even time to scream, nor had the 4 men who stood behind him. Their ruined bodies, the broken remnants of the grey tree trunk, and a great quantity of earth and rocks around them, were ripped from the ground and flung through the air to shatter against the rocky wall of the gorge, 100 strides distant, with a big sound like a house collapsing. Jezal's mouth hung open. His body froze. It had taken only a terrifying instant. One moment 5 men had been standing there. The next they were slaughtered meat among a heap of settling debris. Somewhere behind him he heard the hum of a bowstring. There was a cry, and a body dropped down into the valley, bounced from the sheer rocks and flopped rag-like face down in the stream. Ride, then, roared Bayaz. But Jezal could only sit in his saddle and gape. The air around the Magus was still moving, more than ever. The rocks behind him rippled and twisted like the stones on the bed of a stream. The old man frowned, stared down at his hands. No, he muttered, turning them over before him. The brown leaves on the ground were lifting up into air, fluttering as though on a gust of wind. No, said Bayaz, his eyes opening wide. His whole body had begun to shake. Jezal gulped as the loose stones around them rose from the ground, drifting impossibly upwards. Sticks began to snap from the bushes. Clods of grass began to tear themselves away from the rocks. His coat rustled and flapped, dragged upwards by some unseen force. No, screamed Bayaz. Then his shoulders hunched in a sudden spasm. A tree beside them split apart with a deafening crack, and splinters of wood showered out into the whipping air. Someone was shouting, but Jezal could scarcely hear them. His horse reared, and he had not the wit to hold on. He crashed onto his back on the earth while the whole valley shimmered, trembled, vibrated around him. Bayaz's head snapped back, rigid, one hand up and clawing at the air. A rock, the size of a man's head, flew past Jezel's face and burst apart against a boulder. The air was filled with a storm of whipping rubbish, of fragments of wood and stone and soil and broken gear. Jezel's ears were ringing with a terrifying clattering, rattling, howling. He flung himself down on his face, crossed his arms over his head and squeezed his eyes shut. He thought of his friends, of West and Jalen Horm and Caspa, of Lieutenant Brint even. He thought of his family and his home, of his father and his brothers. He thought of R.D. If he lived to see them again, he would be a better man. He swore it to himself with silent, trembling lips as the unnatural wind ripped the valley apart around him. He would no longer be selfish, no longer be vain, no longer be lazy. He would be a better friend, a better son, a better lover. If only he lived through this. If only he lived through this. If only he could hear his own terrified breath coming in quick gasps, the blood surging in his head. The noise had stopped. Jezel opened his eyes. He lifted his hands from his head, and a shower of twigs and soil fell around him. The gorge was full of settling leaves, misty with choking dust. Nine Fingers was standing nearby, red blood running down his dirty face from a cut on his forehead. He was walking slowly sideways. He had his sword drawn, hanging down by his leg. Someone was facing him, one of the men that had blocked the way behind them, a tall man with a mop of red hair. Circling each other. Jezel watched, kneeling, mouth wide open. He felt in some small way that he should intervene, but he had not the beginnings of an idea how to do so. The red-haired man moved suddenly, leaping forwards and swinging his sword over his head. He moved fast, but Nine Fingers was faster. He stepped sideways so that the whistling blade missed his face by inches. Then he slashed his opponent across the belly as he passed. The man grunted, stumbled a step or two. Nine Fingers' heavy sword chopped into the back of his skull with a hollow clicking sound. He tripped over his own feet and pitched onto his face, blood bubbling from the gaping wound in his head. Jezel watched it spread slowly out through the dirt around the corpse. A wide, dark pool, slowly mingling with the dust and the loose soil on the valley floor. No second touch, no best of three. He became aware of a scuffling, grunting sound, and looked up to see Nine Fingers staggering around with another man, a great big man. The two of them were growling and clawing at each other, wrestling over a knife. Jezel gawped at them. When had that happened? "Stab him," shouted Nine Fingers as the two of them grappled. "Fucking stab him!" Jezel knelt there, staring up. One hand gripped the hilt of his long steel as though he were hanging off a cliff. And this was the last handful of grass, the other hung limp. There was a gentle thud. The big man grunted. There was an arrow sticking out of his side. Another thud. 2 arrows. A third appeared, tightly grouped. He slid slowly out of Nine Fingers' grip, onto his knees, coughing and moaning. He crawled towards Jezel, sat back slowly, grimacing and making a strange mewling sound. He lay back in the road, the arrows sticking up into the air like rushes in the shallows of a lake. He was still. "What about that Phineas bastard? He got away. Hell get others." It was deal with him or deal with that one there. "I had that one. Course you did. If you could have held him another year, maybe Luther might have got round to drawing a blade, eh?" Strange voices. Nothing to do with him. Jezel wobbled slowly up to his feet. His mouth was dry. His knees were weak. His ears were ringing. Bayaz lay in the road on his back, a few strides away, his apprentice kneeling beside him. One of the wizard's eyes was closed, the other slightly open, the lid twitching, a slit of white eyeball showing underneath. "You can let go of that now." Jezel looked down. His hand was still clenched around the grip of his steel, knuckles white. He willed his fingers to relax, and they slowly uncurled. Far away, his palm ached from all that gripping. Jezel felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You all right?" Ninnafinger's voice. "Eh? You hurt?" Jezel stared at himself, turning his hands over stupidly. "Dirty, but no blood. I don't think so. Good. The horses ran. Who can blame them, right? If I had 4 legs, I'd be halfway back to the sea by now. What? Why don't you catch them? Who made you the leader? Ninefinger's heavy brows drew in slightly. Yezal became aware that they were standing very close to one another, and that the Northman's hand was still on his shoulder. It was only resting there, but he could feel the strength of it through his coat, and it felt strong enough to twist his arm off. Damn his mouth! It got him in all kinds of trouble. He expected a punch in the face at the very least, if not a fatal wound in his head. But Ninefingers only pursed his lips thoughtfully and began to speak. We're a lot different, you and me. Different in all kind of ways. I see you don't have much respect for my kind, or for me in particular, and I don't much blame you. The dead know I got my shortcomings, and I ain't entirely ignorant of 'em. You may think you're a clever man, and I'm a stupid one, and I dare say you're right. There's sure to be a very many things that you know more about than I do, but when it comes to fighting, I'm sorry to say, there's few men with a wider experience than me. No offense, but we both know you're not one of 'em. No one made me the leader, but this is the task that needs doing. He stepped closer still, his great paw gripping Jezel's shoulder with a fatherly firmness, halfway between reassurance and threat. Is that a worry? Jezel thought about it for a moment. He was out of his depth, and the events of the past few minutes had demonstrated beyond question just how far. He looked down at the man that Ninefingers had killed only a moment before, and the cleft in the back of his head yawned wide. Perhaps, for the moment it would be best if he simply did as he was told. No worry, he said. Good. Ninefingers grinned, clapped him on the shoulder and let him go. Horses still need catching, and you're the man for the job, I reckon. Jael nodded and stumbled away to look for them. Chapter 15. 100 words. There was something peculiar afoot, that was sure. Colonel Glokta tested his limbs, but he appeared unable to move. The sun was blinding bright in his eyes. Did we beat the Gurkish? With God's help we put them to the sword, butchered them like cattle. The old native went back to chewing on the severed hand he held. He'd already got through a couple of fingers. Glokta raised his arm to take it, but there was nothing there, only a bloody stump, chewed off at the wrist. I swear, murmured the colonel, it's my hand you're eating. Kadia smiled. And it is entirely delicious. I do congratulate you. Utterly delicious, muttered General Visbruck, taking the hand from Kadia and sucking a strip of ragged flesh from it. Must be all that fencing you did as a young man. There was blood smeared across his plump, smiling face. The fencing, of course, said Glokta. I'm glad you like it, though the whole business did seem somewhat strange. We do, cried Verms. He was cupping the remains of Glokta's foot in his hands like a slice of melon, and nibbling at it daintily. All 4 of us are delighted. Tastes like roast pork. Like good cheese, shouted Visbruck. Like sweet honey, cooed Kadia, sprinkling a little salt onto Glokta's midriff. Like sweet money, purred Magister Eider's voice from somewhere down below. Glokta propped himself up on his elbows. Why, what are you doing down there? She looked up and grinned at him. You took my rings. The least you can do is give me something in return. Her teeth sank into his right thigh, deep in like tiny daggers, and scooped out a neat ball of flesh. She slurped blood hungrily from the wound, tongue darting out across his skin. Colonel Glokta raised his eyebrows. You're right, of course. Quite right. It really hurt a great deal less than one would have expected, but sitting upright was rather draining. He fell back onto the sand and lay there, looking up at the blue sky. All of you are quite right. She had made it up to his hip now. Ah, giggled the colonel. That tickles. What a pleasure it was, he thought, to be eaten by such a beautiful woman. A little to the left, he murmured, closing his eyes. Just a little to the left. Glokta sat up in bed with an agonizing jerk, back arched as tight as a full-drawn bow. His left leg trembled under the clammy sheet. Wasted muscles knotted hard with searing cramps. He bit down on his lip with his remaining teeth to keep from screaming, snorted heaving gasps through his nose, face screwed up with his furious efforts to control the pain. Just when it seemed that his leg would rip itself apart, the sinews suddenly relaxed. Glokta collapsed back into his clammy bed and lay there, breathing hard. Damn these fucking dreams. Every part of him was aching. Every part of him was weak and trembling, wet with cold sweat. He frowned in the darkness. There was a strange sound filling the room, a rushing, hissing sound. What is that? Slowly, gingerly, he rolled over and levered himself out of bed, hobbled to the window and stood there, looking out. It was as though the city beyond his room had vanished. A gray curtain had descended, cutting him off from the world. Rain. It spattered against the sill, fat drops bursting into soft spray, throwing a cool mist into the chamber, dampening the carpet beneath the window, the drapes around the opening, soothing Glokta's clammy skin. Rain. He had forgotten that such a thing existed. There was a flash, lightning in the distance. The spires of the great temple were cut out black through the hissing murk for an instant, and then the darkness closed back in, joined by a long, angry muttering of distant thunder. Glokta stuck his arm out through the window, felt the water pattering cold against his skin. A strange, unfamiliar feeling. I swear, he murmured to himself. The first rain's come. Glokta nearly choked as he spun around, stumbled, clutched at the wet stones around the window for support. It was dark as hell in the room. There was no telling where the voice had come from. Did I only imagine it? Am I still dreaming? A sublime moment. The world seems to live again. Glokta's heart froze in his chest. A man's voice, deep and rich. The voice of the one who took Davos. Who will soon take me? The room was illuminated by another brilliant flash. The speaker sat cross-legged on the carpet. An old black man with long hair. Between me and the door. No way past, even if I was a considerably better runner than I am. The light was gone as soon as it arrived, but the image persisted for a moment, burned into Glokta's eyes. Then came the crash of thunder splitting the sky, echoing in the darkness of the wide chamber. No one would hear my despairing screams for help, even if anyone cared. Who the hell are you? Glokta's voice was squeaky with shock. Yulwei is my name. You need not be alarmed. Not alarmed? Are you fucking joking? If I had a mind to kill you, you would have died in your sleep. I would have left a body, though, some comfort. Glokta's mind raced, thinking over the objects within reach. I might make it as far as the ornamental tea jar on the table. He almost laughed. And do what with it? Offer him tea? Nothing to fight with, even if I was a considerably more effective fighter than I am. How did you get in? I have my ways, the same ways in which I crossed the wide desert, traveled the busy road from Shafa unobserved, passed through the Gurkish host and into the city. And to think, you could have just knocked. Knocking does not guarantee an entrance. Glokta's eyes strained against the gloom, but he could see nothing beyond the vague gray outlines of furniture, the arched gray spaces of the other windows. The rain pattered on the sill behind, hissed quietly on the roofs of the city below. Just when he was wondering if his dream was over, the voice came again. I have been watching the Gurkish, as I have these many years. That is my allotted task, my penance, for the part I played in the schism that has split my order. Your order, the Order of Magi. I am the fourth of Juven's 12 apprentices, a magus. I might have known, like that bald old meddler Bayaz, and I gained nothing but confusion from him. As if there were not enough to worry about with politics and treachery. Now we must have myth and superstition to boot. Still, it looks as if I will last out the night at least. A magus, eh? Forgive me if I don't celebrate. Such dealings as I've had with your order have been a waste of my time at best. Perhaps I can repair our reputation then. I bring you information. Free of charge. This time, the Gurkish are moving. 5 of their golden standards pass down the peninsula tonight, under cover of the storm. 20,000 spears with great engines of war. 5 more standards wait behind the hills. And that is not all. The roads from Shafa to Ul-Katif, from Ul-Katif to Dalepa, from Dalepa to the sea, all are thick with soldiers. The emperor puts forth all his strength. The whole south moves. Conscripts from Kadir and Dawa, wild riders from Yashtavet, fierce savages from the jungles of Shamir, where men and women fight side by side. They all come northwards, coming here to fight for the emperor, so many. Just to take Dagoska, and more besides. The emperor has built himself a navy, 100 sail of great ships. The Gurkish are no sailors. The Union controls the sea. The world changes, and you must change with it or be swept aside. This war will not be like the last. Khalul finally sends forth his own soldiers, an army many long years in the making. The gates of the great temple fortress of Sarkant are opening high in the barren mountains. I have seen it. Mamun comes forth, thrice blessed and thrice cursed, the fruit of the desert. First apprentice of Khalul. Together they broke the second law. Together they ate the flesh of men. The 100 words come behind, eaters all, disciples of the prophet, bred for battle and fed over these long years, adepts in the disciplines of arms and of high art. No peril like it has faced the world since the old time, when Juvens fought with Canidius. Since before that, perhaps, when Glustrad touched the other side and sought to open the gates to the world below. And blah, blah. A shame. He had been making surprising sense for a magus. You want to give me information? Keep your bedtime stories and tell me what happened to Davost. There is an eater here. I smell it, a dweller in the shadows, one whose only task is to destroy those who oppose the prophet, and myself the first of them. Your predecessor never left these chambers. The ear took him to protect the traitor who works within the city. Now we speak my language. Who is the traitor? Glokta's voice sounded shrill, sharp, greedy in his own ear. I am no fortune-teller, cripple, and if I could give you the answer, would you believe me? Men must learn at their own pace. Bah, snapped Glokta. You are just like Bayaz. You talk, and yet you say nothing. Eaters, nothing but old stories and nonsense. Stories. Did Bayaz not take you within the Maker's house? Glokta swallowed, his hand clinging trembling tight to the damp stone under the window. Yet still you doubt me? You are slow to learn, cripple. Have I not seen the slaves march to Sarkant, dragged from every land the Gurkish conquer? Have I not seen the countless columns, driven up into the mountains? To feed Khalul and his disciples, to swell their power ever further. A crime against God, a breach of the second law, written in fire by Oz himself. You doubt me, and perhaps you are wise to doubt me, but at first light you will see the Gurkish have come. You will count 5 standards, and you will know I spoke the truth. Well, who is the traitor? Hissed Glokta. Tell me, you riddling bastard. Silence, but for the splashing of rain, the trickling of water, the rustling of wind and the hangings about the window. A stroke of lightning threw sudden light into every corner. The carpet was empty. Yulwai was gone. The Gurkish host came slowly forward in 5 enormous blocks, 2 in front, 3 behind, covering the whole neck of land from sea to sea. They moved together in perfect formation to the deep thumping of great drums, rank upon rigid rank, the sound of their tramping boots like the distant thunder of the night before. Already the sun had sucked away all evidence of the rain, and now it flashed mirror-bright on thousands of helmets, thousands of shields, glittering arrowheads, coats of armor, a forest of shining spears, moving inexorably forwards, a merciless, tireless, irresistible tide of men. Union soldiers were scattered around the top of the land walls, squatting behind the parapet, fingering their flatbows, peering out nervously at the advancing host. Glokta could sense their fear, and who can blame them? We must be outnumbered 10 to 1 already. There were no drums up here in the wind, no shouted orders, no hurried preparations, only silence. And here they come, mused Nikimo Koska, grinning out at the scene. He alone seemed untouched by fear. He has either an iron nerve or a leaden imagination. Lazing in a drinking hole or waiting for death, all seems to be one to him. He was standing with one foot up on the parapet, forearms crossed on his knee, half-full bottle dangling from one hand. The mercenary's battle dress was much the same as his drink gear, the same sagging boots, the same ruined trousers. His one allowance for the dangers of the battlefield was a black breastplate, etched front and back with golden scrollwork. It too had seen better days, the enamel chipped, the rivets stained with rust, but it must once have been quite the masterpiece. That's a fine piece of armor you have there. What, this? Koska looked down at his breastplate. In its day, perhaps, but it's seen some hard use over the years. Been left out in the rain more than once. A gift from the Grand Duchess Cephaline of Austria, in return for defeating the army of Sapani in the 5-month war. It came with a promise of her eternal friendship. Nice to have friends. Not really. That very night she tried to have me killed. My victories had made me far too popular with Cephaline's own subjects. She feared I might try to seize power. Poison in my wine. Koska took a long swig from his bottle. Killed my favorite mistress. I was forced to flee, with little more than this damn breastplate, and seek employment with the Prince of Sapani. That old bastard didn't pay half so well, but at least I got to lead his army against the Duchess, and have the satisfaction of seeing her poisoned in her turn. He frowned. Made her face turn blue. Bright blue, believe me. Never get too popular. That's my advice. Glokta snorted. Overpopularity is scarcely my most pressing worry. Visbrook cleared his throat noisily, evidently upset at being ignored. He gestured towards the endless ranks of men advancing down the isthmus. Superior, the dirkish approach. Indeed, I had not noticed. Do I have your permission to flood the ditch? Oh yes, your moment of glory. Very well. Visbrook strutted to the parapet with an air of the greatest self-importance. He slowly raised his arm, then chopped it portentously through the air. Somewhere, out of sight below, whips cracked and teams of mules strained on ropes. The complaining squeal of wood under great pressure reached them on the battlements. Then a creaking and a cracking as the dams gave way, and then an angry thundering as the great weight of salt water broke through and surged down the deep ditch from both ends, foaming angry white. Water met water just beneath them, throwing glittering spray into the air as high as the battlements and higher yet. A moment later, and this new ribbon of sea was calm. The ditch had become a channel. The city had become an island. They certainly have no shortage of men to choose from. 5 tall poles waved gently above the tramping mass of soldiers, Gurkish symbols glittering upon them in solid gold. Symbols of battles fought and battles won. The standards of 5 legions flashing in the merciless sun. 5 legions, just as the old man told me. Will ships follow then? Glokta turned his head and peered out across the lower city. The long wharves stuck into the bay like the spines of a hedgehog, still busy with ships. Ships carrying our supplies in, and the last few nervous merchants out. There were no walls there, few defenses of any kind. We did not think we needed them. The Union has always ruled the seas. If ships should come, do we still have supplies of wood and stone? The general nodded vigorously, all eagerness. Finally adjusted to the changes in the chain of command, it seems. Abundant supplies, superior, precisely as your orders specified. I want you to build a wall behind the docks and along the shoreline. As strong and as high, and as soon as possible. Our defenses there are weak. The Gurkish may test them sooner or later. The general frowned out at the swarming army of soldiers crawling over the peninsula, looked down towards the calm docks and back. But surely the threat from the landward side is a little more pressing. The Gurkish are poor sailors, and in any case have no fleet worthy of the name. The world changes, General. The world changes. Of course. Visbrook turned to speak to his aides. Glokta shuffled up to the parapet beside Koska. How many Gurkish troops would you judge? The Styrian scratched at the flaky rash on the side of his neck. I count 5 standards. I count 5 standards. Five of the Emperor's legions, and plenty more besides. Scouts, engineers, irregulars from across the south. How many troops? He squinted up into the sun, lips moving silently as though his head was full of complex sums. A fucking lot. He tipped his head back and sucked the last drops from his bottle. Then he smacked his lips, pulled back his arm and hurled it towards the Gurkish. It flashed in the sun for a moment, then shattered against the hard dirt on the other side of the channel. Do you see those carts at the back? Glokta squinted down his eyeglass. There did indeed seem to be a shadowy column of great wagons behind the mass of soldiery, barely visible in the shimmering haze and the clouds of dust kicked up by the stomping boots. Soldiers need supplies, of course. But then again, here and there he could see long timbers sticking up like spiders' legs. Ziege engines, muttered Glokta to himself. All just as Yulway said. They are in earnest. Ah, but so are you. Koska stood up beside the parapet, started to fiddle with his belt. A moment later, Glokta heard the sound of his piss spattering against the base of the wall far below. The mercenary grinned over his shoulder, thin hair fluttering in the salt wind. Everyone's in lots of earnest. I must speak to Magister Ida. I'd say I'll be getting my battle money soon. I think so. Glokta slowly lowered his eyeglass. And earning it too. Chapter 16. The blind lead the blind. The first of the Magi lay twisted on his back in the cart, wedged between a water barrel and a sack of horse feed, a coil of rope for his pillow. Lodgen had never seen him look so old, and thin, and weak. His breath came shallow. His skin was pale and blotchy, drawn tight over his bones and beaded with sweat. From time to time he'd twitch and squirm and mutter strange words, his eyelids flickering like a man trapped in a bad dream. What happened? Quai stared down. Whenever you use the art, you borrow from the other side, and what is borrowed has to be repaid. There are risks, even for a master. To seek to change the world with a thought, the arrogance of it. The corners of his mouth twitched up into a smile. Borrow too often, perhaps, one time you touch the world below, and leave a piece of yourself behind. Behind, muttered Lodgen, peering down at the twitching old man. He didn't much like the way Quai was talking. It was no smiling matter as far as he could see, to be stuck out in the middle of nowhere without a clue where they were going. Just think, whispered the apprentice, the first of the Magi himself, helpless as a baby. He laid his hand gently on Bayaz's chest. He clings on to life by a thread. I could reach out now with this weak hand and kill him. Lodgen frowned. Why would you want to do that? Quai looked up and smiled his sickly smile. Why would anyone? I was merely saying, and he snatched his hand away. How long will he stay like this? The apprentice sat back in the cart and stared up at the sky. There's no saying. Maybe hours, maybe forever. Forever? Lodgen ground his teeth. Where does that leave us? You have any idea where we're going? Or why? Or what we do when we get there? Should we turn back? No. Quai's face was sharp as a blade, sharper than Lodgen would ever have expected from him. We have enemies behind us. To turn back now would be more dangerous than to continue. We carry on. Lodgen winced and rubbed at his eyes. He felt tired and sore and sick. He wished he'd asked Bayaz his plans when he'd had the chance. He wished he'd never left the north if it came to that. He could have sought out a reckoning with Bethid and died in a place he knew, at the hands of men that he at least understood. Lodgen had no wish to lead. Lodgen had no wish to lead. The time was he'd hungered after fame, and glory, and respect, but the winning of them had been costly, and they'd proved to be hollow prizes. Men had put their faith in him, and he'd led them by a painful and a bloody route straight back to the mud. There was no ambition in him anymore. He was cursed when it came to making decisions. He took his hands away and looked around him. Bayaz still lay muttering in his fevered sleep. Quai was gazing carelessly up at the clouds. Luther was standing with his back to the others, staring down the gorge. Pharaoh was sitting on a rock, cleaning her bow with a rag and scowling. Longfoot had reappeared, predictably, just as the danger ended, and was standing not far away, looking pleased with himself. Lodgen grimaced and gave a long sigh. There was no help for it. There was no one else. All right, we head for this bridge at Alcus, then we see. Not a good idea, tutted Longfoot, wandering up to the cart and peering in. Not a good idea in the least. I warned our employer of that before his mishap. The city is deserted, destroyed, ruined, a blighted and a broken and a dangerous place. The bridge may still stand, but according to rumor, Alcus was the plan, and I reckon we'll stick with it. Longfoot carried on as though he hadn't spoken. I think perhaps that it would be best if we headed back towards Chalcis. We are still less than halfway to our ultimate destination, and have ample food and water for the return journey. With some luck, you were paid to go all the way? Well, indeed I was, but... Alcus, the navigator blinked. Well, yes, I see that you are decided. Decisiveness and boldness and vigor, it would seem, are among your talents, but caution and wisdom and experience, if I may say, are among mine. And I am in no doubt whatsoever that, Alcus, growled Logen. Longfoot paused with his mouth half open. Then he snapped it shut. Very well. We will follow the road back onto the plains and head westward to the Three Lakes. Alcus is at their head, but the journey is still a long and dangerous one, especially with winter well upon us. There should be. Good. Logen turned away before the navigator had the chance to say anything more. That was the easy part. He sucked his teeth and walked over to Pharaoh. Bayaz is, he struggled for the right word. Out. We don't know how long for. She nodded. We going on? I reckon that's the plan. All right. She got up from her rock and slung the bow over her shoulder. Best get moving then. Easier than he'd expected. Too easy, perhaps. Too easy, perhaps. He wondered if she was thinking of sneaking off again. He was considering it himself, truth be told. I don't even know where we're going, she snorted. I've never known where I was going. You ask me. It's an improvement. You in charge. She walked off towards the horses. I never trusted that bald bastard. And that only left Luthar. He was standing with his back to the others, shoulders slumped, thoroughly miserable looking. Logen could see the muscles on the side of his head working as he stared at the ground. You all right? You all right? Luthar hardly seemed to hear him. I wanted to, and I knew how to, and I had my hand on my steels. He slapped angrily at the hilt of one of his swords. I was helpless as a fucking baby. Why couldn't I move? That it. By the dead boy, that happens to some men the first time. It does. More than you'd believe. At least you didn't shit yourself. Luthar raised his eyebrow. That happens. More than you'd believe. Did you freeze up the first time? Logen frowned. No. Killing comes too easy to me. Always has done. Believe me, you're the lucky one. Unless I'm killed for doing nothing. Well, Logen had to admit, there is that. Luther's head dropped even lower, and Logen clapped him on the arm. But you did killed. Cheer up, boy, you're lucky. You're still alive, aren't you? He gave a miserable nod. Logen slid his arm round his shoulder and guided him back towards the horses. Then you've got the chance to do better next time. Next time. Course, doing better next time. That's what life is. Logen climbed back into the saddle, stiff from all the riding, sore from the fight in the gorge. Stiff from all the riding, sore from the fight in the gorge. Some bit of rock had cracked him on the back. That, and he'd got a good punch on the side of his head. Could have been a lot worse. He looked round at the others. They were all mounted up, staring at him. 4 faces as different as could be, but all with the same expression, more or less, waiting for his say. Why did anyone ever think he had the answers? He swallowed, and dug his heels in. Let's go. Chapter 17. Prince Ladisla Stratagem. You really should spend less time in here, Colonel West. Pike set down his hammer for a moment, the orange light from his forge reflecting in his eyes, shining bright on his melted face. People will start to talk. West cracked a nervous grin. It's the only warm place in the whole damn camp. It was true enough, but a long way from the real reason. It was the only place in the whole damn camp where no one would look for him. Men who were starving, men who were freezing, men who had no water, or no weapon, or no clue what they were doing. Men who died of cold or illness and needed burying. Even the dead couldn't manage without West. Everyone needed him, day and night. Everyone except Pike and his daughter, and the rest of the convicts. They alone seemed self-sufficient, and so their forge had become his refuge. A noisy and a crowded, and a smoky refuge, no doubt, but no less sweet for that. He preferred it immeasurably to being with the prince and his staff. Here among the criminals it was more honest. You're in the way, Colonel. Again, Cathal shoved past him, a knife blade glowing orange and the tongs in one gloved hand. She shoved it into the water, frowning, turning it this way and that while steam hissed up around her. West watched her move, quick and practiced, beads of moisture on her sinewy arm, the back of her neck, hair dark and spiky with sweat. Hard to believe he'd ever taken her for a boy. She might handle the metal as well as any of the men, but the shape of her face, not to mention her chest, her waist, the curve of her backside, all unmistakably female. She glanced over her shoulder and caught him looking. Don't you have an army to run? They'll last 10 minutes without me. She drew the cold black blade from the water and tossed it clattering onto the heap beside the whetstone. You sure? Maybe she was right at that. West took a deep breath, sighed, turned with some reluctance, and ventured out through the door of the shed and into the camp. The winter air nipped at his cheeks after the heat of the smithy, and he pulled up the collars of his coat, hugged himself as he struggled down the camp's main road. It was deathly quiet out here at night. Once he had left the rattling of the forge behind him, he could hear the frozen mud sucking at his boots, his breath rasping in his throat, the faint cursing of some distant soldier, grumbling his way through the darkness. He stopped a moment and looked up, arms folded round himself for warmth. The sky was perfectly clear, the stars, prickling bright, spread across the blackness like shining dust. Beautiful, he murmured to himself. You get used to it. It was Three Trees, picking his way between the tents with the dogman at his shoulder. His face was in shadow, all dark pits and white angles like a cliff in the moonlight. But West could tell there was some ill news coming. The old Northman could hardly have been described as a figure of fun at the best of times, but now his frown was grim indeed. Well met, said West in the northern tongue. You think Bethod is inside 5 days' march of your camp. The cold seemed suddenly to cut through West's coat and make him shiver. 5 days? If he's stayed put since we saw him, and that ain't likely. Bethod was never one for staying put. If he's marching south, he could be 3 days away. Less even, what are his numbers? The dogman licked his lips, breath smoking round his lean face in the chill air. I'd guess at 10,000, but he might have more behind. West felt colder yet. 10,000? That many? Around 10, Mostly thralls. Thralls? Light infantry? Light, but not like this rubbish you have here. Three Trees scowled around at the shabby tents, the badly built campfires close to guttering out. Bethod's thralls are lean and bloody from battles and tough as wood from marching. Those bastards can run all day and still fight at the end of it, if it's needed. Bowmen, spearmen, all well practiced. There's no shortage of carls and all, muttered the dogman. That there ain't, with strong mail and good blades, and plenty of horses into the bargain. There'll be named men, too, no doubt. No doubt, it's the pick of the crop Bethod's brought with him, and some sharp war leaders in amongst him, that and some strange folk from out east. Wild men from beyond the Crinna. Must have left a few boys dotted about up north, for your friends to chase around after, and brought his best fighters south with him, against your weakest. The old warrior stared grimly round at the slovenly camp from under his thick eyebrows. No offense, but I don't give you a shit of a chance if it comes to a battle. The worst of all outcomes. West swallowed. How fast could such an army move? West swallowed. Fast. Their scouts might be with us day after tomorrow. Main body a day later. If they've come right on, that is, and it's hard to say if they will. Wouldn't put it past Bethod to try and cross the river lower down, come round behind us. Behind us? They were scarcely equipped for a predictable enemy. How could he have known we were here? Bethod always had a gift for guessing out his enemies. Good sense for it. That and he's a lucky bastard. Loves to take chances. Ain't nothing more important in war than a good slice o' luck. West looked around him, blinking. 10,000 battle-hardened Northmen descending on their ramshackle camp. Lucky, unpredictable Northmen. He imagined trying to turn the ill-disciplined levies up to their ankles in mud, trying to get them to form a line. It would be a slaughter, another black well in the making. But at least they had a warning. 3 days to prepare their defenses, or better still, to begin to retreat. We must speak to the prince at once, he said. Soft music and warm light washed out into the chill night air as West jerked back the tent flap. He stooped through, reluctantly with the 2 Northmen close behind him. By the dead, muttered Three Trees, gaping round. West had forgotten how bizarre the prince's quarters must appear to a newcomer, especially one who was a stranger to luxury. It was less a tent than a huge hall of purple cloth, 10 strides or more in height, hung with Styrian tapestries, and floored with Celtic carpets. The furniture would have been more in keeping in a palace than a camp. Huge carved dressers and gilt chests held the prince's endless wardrobe, enough to clothe an army of dandies. The bed was a gargantuan 4-poster, bigger than most tents in the camp on its own. A highly polished table in one corner sagged under the weight of heaped-up delicacies. silver and gold plate twinkling in the candlelight. One could hardly imagine that only a few hundred strides away, men were cramped and cold and had not enough to eat. Crown Prince Ladisla himself sat sprawled in a huge chair of dark wood, a throne, one could have said, upholstered in red silk. An empty glass dangled from one hand, while the other waved back and forth to the music of a quartet of expert musicians, plucking, fiddling and blowing gently at their shining instruments in the far corner. Around His Highness were 4 of his staff, impeccably dressed and fashionably bored, among them the young Lord Smund, who had perhaps become, over the past few weeks, West's least favored person in the entire world. "It does you great credit," Smund was braying loudly to the prince. "Sharing the hardships of the camp has always been a fine way to win the respect of the common soldier." "Ah, Colonel West," chirped Ladisla. "And 2 of his northern scouts! What a delight! You must take some food." He made a floppy, drunken gesture towards the table. "Thank you, Your Highness, but I have eaten. I have some news of the greatest, or some wine." "You must all have wine. This is an excellent vintage. Where did that bottle get to?" He fumbled about beneath his chair. The dogman had already crossed to the table and was leaning over it, sniffing at the food like a dog. He snatched a large slice of beef from the plate with his dirty fingers, folded it carefully and stuffed it whole into his mouth, while Smund looked on, lip curled with contempt. It would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances, but West had larger worries. "Bethod is within 5 days' march of us," he nearly shouted. "With the best part of his strength." One of the musicians fumbled his bow and hit a screeching, discordant note. Ladisla jerked his head up, nearly sliding from his seat. Even Smund and his companions were pulled from their indolence. "5 days," muttered the prince, his voice hoarse with excitement. "Are you sure?" "Perhaps no more than 3. How many are they?" "As many as 10,000, and veterans to excellent." Ladisla slapped the arm of his chair, as if it were a Northman's face. "We are on equal terms with them." West swallowed. "Perhaps in numbers, Your Highness, but not in quality." "Come now, Colonel West," droned Smund. "One good Union man is worth 10 of their kind." He stared down his nose at Three Trees. "Blackwell proved that notion a fantasy. Even if our men were properly fed, trained, and equipped, aside from the king's own, they are none of these things. We would be well advised to prepare defenses and make ready to withdraw if we must." Smund snorted his contempt for that idea. "There is nothing more dangerous in war," he disclaimed airily. "Than too much caution, except too little," growled West, the fury already starting to pulse behind his eyes. But Prince Ladisla cut him off before he had the chance to lose his temper. "Gentlemen, enough!" He sprang up from his chair, eyes dewy with drunken enthusiasm. "I have already decided on my strategy. We will cross the river and intercept these savages. They think to surprise us? Huh!" He lashed at the air with his wineglass. "We will give them a surprise they will not soon forget. Drive them back over the border, just as Marshal Burr intended." "But, Your Highness," stammered West, feeling slightly queasy. "The Lord Marshal explicitly ordered that we remain behind the river." Ladisla flicked his head, as though bothered by a fly. "The spirit of his orders, Colonel, not the letter. He can hardly complain if we take the fight to our enemy." "These men are fucking fools," rumbled Three Trees, luckily in the northern tongue. "What did he say?" inquired the prince. "He concurs with me that we should hold here, Your Highness, and send to Lord Marshal Burr for help." "Does he indeed? And I thought these Northmen were all fire and vinegar." "Well, Colonel West, you may inform him that I am resolved on an attack, and cannot be moved. We will show this so-called king of the Northmen that he does not hold a monopoly on victory." "Good show!" shouted Smund, stamping his foot on the thick carpet. "Excellent!" The rest of the prince's staff voiced their ignorant support. "Kick them back across the border. Teach them a lesson." "Excellent, capital. Is there more wine?" West clenched his fists with frustration. He had to make one more effort, however embarrassing, however pointless. He dropped to one knee. He clasped his hands together. He fixed the prince with his eye and gathered every ounce of persuasiveness he possessed. "Your Highness, I ask you, I entreat you, I beg you to reconsider. The lives of every man in this camp depend on your decision." The prince grinned. "Such is the weight of command, my friend. I realize your motives are of the best, but I must agree with Lord Smund. Boldness is the best policy in war, and boldness shall be my strategy. It was through boldness that Harald the Great forged the Union, through boldness that King Casimir conquered Angland in the first place. We will get the better of these Northmen yet, you'll see. Give the orders, Colonel. We march at first light." West had studied Casimir's campaigns in detail. Boldness had been 1/10 of his success. The rest had been meticulous planning, care for his men, attention to every detail. Boldness without the rest was apt to be deadly, but he saw that it was pointless to say so. He would only anger the prince and lose whatever influence he might still have. He felt like a man watching his own house burn down, numb, sick, utterly helpless. There was nothing left for him to do but to give the orders, and do his best to see that everything was conducted as well as it could be. "Of course, Your Highness," he managed to mutter. "Of course," the prince grinned. "We are all in agreement then. Capital! Stop that music!" He shouted at the musicians. "We need something with more vigor, something with blood in it." The quartet switched effortlessly to a jaunty martial theme. West turned, limbs heavy with hopelessness, and trudged out of the tent into the icy night. 3 Trees was hard on his heels. "By the dead, but I can't work you people out. Where I come from, a man earns the right to lead. His men follow because they know his quality, and respect him because he shares their hardships with him." Even Beth had won his place. He strode up and down before the tent, waving his big hands. "Here you pick the ones who know the least to lead and fix on the biggest fool of the whole pack for a commander." West could think of nothing to say. He could hardly deny it. "That prick'll march the lotto you right into your fucking graves. Back to the mud with you all, but I'm damned if I'll follow or any of my boys. I'm done paying for other folks' mistakes, and I've lost enough to that bastard Beethit already. Come on, dogman. This boat of fools can sink without us." And he turned and stalked away into the night. The dogman shrugged. "Ain't all bad." He closed to a conspiratorial distance, reached deep into his pocket, and pulled something out. West stared down at an entire poached salmon, no doubt pilfered from the prince's table. The Northman grinned. "I got me a fish," and he followed his chief, leaving West alone on the bitter hillside, Ladisla's martial music floating through the chill air behind him. Chapter 18. Until Sunset. Oh! A rough hand shook Glokta from his sleep. He rolled his head gingerly from the side he had been sleeping on, clenching his teeth at the pain as his neck clicked. "Does death come early in the morning today?" "Dad?" He opened his eyes a crack. Not quite yet, it seems. Perhaps at lunchtime. Vitari stared down at him, spiky hair silhouetted black in the early morning sun streaming through the window. "Very well, practical Vitari. If you really can't resist me, you'll have to go on top, though, if you don't mind." "Ha. The Gurkish ambassador is here." "The what?" "An emissary. From the emperor himself, I hear." Glokta felt a stab of panic. "We're here in the citadel, speaking to the ruling council." "Shit on it," snarled Glokta, scrambling out of bed, ignoring the stabbing pain in his leg as he swung his ruined left foot onto the floor. "Why didn't they call for me?" Vitari scowled down at him. "Maybe they preferred to talk to him without you." "You think that could be it? How the hell did he get here?" "He came in by boat, under sign of parley. Visbrook says he was duty-bound to admit him." "Duty-bound?" spat Glokta as he struggled to pull his trousers up his numb and trembling leg. "That fat fucker! How long has he been here? Long enough for him and the council to make some pretty mischief together if that's their aim." "Shit!" Glokta winced as he shrugged his shirt on. The Gurkish ambassador was, without doubt, a majestic presence. His nose was prominent and hooked, his eyes burned bright with intelligence. His long, thin beard was neatly brushed, gold thread in his sweeping white robe, and his tall headdress glittered in the bright sun. He held his body awesomely erect, long neck stretched out, chin held high, so that he looked always down at everything he deigned to look upon. Hugely tall and thin, he made the lofty, magnificent room seem low and shabby. He could pass for an emperor himself. Glokta was keenly aware of how bent and awkward he must look as he shuffled, grimacing and sweating, into the audience chamber. The miserable crow faces the magnificent peacock. Still, battles are not always won by the most beautiful. Fortunately for me, the long table was surprisingly empty. Only Visbruck, Ida, and Korsten Danverms were in their seats, and none of them looked pleased to see him arrive. Nor should they, the bastards. "No Lord Governor today," he barked. "My father is not well," muttered Verms. "Shame you couldn't stay and comfort him in his illness. What about Kadia?" No one spoke. "Didn't think he'd take to a meeting with them, eh?" He nodded rudely at the emissary. "How lucky for everyone that you three have stronger stomachs. I am Superior Glokta, and whatever you might have heard, I am in charge here. I must apologize for my late arrival, but no one told me you were coming." He looked daggers at Visbruck, but the general was not interested in meeting his eye. "That's right, you blustering fool. I won't forget this. My name is Shabd al-Islik Burai." The ambassador spoke the common tongue perfectly, in a voice every bit as powerful, as authoritative, as arrogant as his bearing. "I come as emissary from the rightful ruler of all the south, mighty emperor of mighty Gurkul, and all the Kantic lands, Uthman ul-Dosht, loved, feared, and favored above all other men within the circle of the world, anointed by God's right hand, the prophet Kalul himself. Good for you." I would bow, but I strained my back getting out of bed. Eilik gave a delicate sneer. "Truly, a warrior's injury. I have come to accept your surrender." "Is that so?" Glokta dragged out the nearest chair and sank into it. "I'm damned if I'm going to stand a moment longer just for the benefit of this towering oaf. I thought it was traditional to make such offers once the fighting is over." "If there is to be fighting, it will not last long." The ambassador swept across the tiles to the window. "I see 5 legions, arrayed in battle order upon the peninsula. 20,000 spears, and they are but a fraction of what comes. The troops of the Emperor are more numerous than the grains of sand in the desert. To resist us would be as futile as to resist the tide. You all know this." His eyes swept proudly across the guilty faces of the ruling council and came to rest on Glokta's with a piercing contempt. The look of a man who believes he has already won. No one could blame him much for thinking so. Perhaps he has. Only fools or madmen would choose to stand against such odds. "You pinks have never belonged here. The Emperor offers you the chance to leave the south with your lives. Open the gates to us, and you will be spared. You can leave on your little boats and float back to your little island. Let it never be said that Uthman ul-Dosht is not generous. God fights beside us. Your cause is lost. Oh, I don't know. We held our own in the last war. I'm sure we all remember the fall of Uriach. I know I do. The city burned brightly. The temples especially." Glokta shrugged. "God must have been elsewhere that day." "That day, yes. But there were other battles. I am sure you also remember a certain engagement at a certain bridge where a certain young officer fell into our hands." The emissary smiled. "God is everywhere." Glokta felt his eyelid flickering. He knows I am not likely to forget. He remembered his surprise as a Gurkish spear cut into his body. Surprise and disappointment and the most intense pain. Not invulnerable, after all. He remembered his horse rearing, dumping him from the saddle. The pain growing worse, the surprise turning into fear, crawling among the boots and the bodies, gasping for air, mouth sour with dust, salty with blood. He remembered the agony as the blades cut into his leg, the fear turning to terror. He remembered how they dragged him, screaming and crying, from that bridge. That night they began to ask their questions. "We won," said Glokta, but his mouth was dry. His voice was cracked. "We proved the stronger. That was then. The world changes. Your nation's entanglements in the icy north put you at a most considerable disadvantage. You have managed to break the first rule of warfare. Never fight 2 enemies at once." His reasoning is hard to fault. "The walls of Dagaska have frustrated you before," Glokta said, but it did not sound convincing, even to his own ear. Hardly the words of a winner. He felt the eyes of Verms and Visbruck, an ire on him, making his back itch. Trying to decide who holds the upper hand, and I know who I'd pick in their shoes. Perhaps some of you have more confidence in your walls than others. I will return at sunset for your answer." The Emperor's offer lasts for this one day only, and will never be repeated. He is merciful, but his mercy has limits. You have until sunset." And he swept from the room. Glokta waited until the door had clicked shut before he slowly turned his chair around to face the others. "What in hell was that?" he snarled at Visbruck. The general tugged at his sweaty collar. "It was incumbent upon me, as a soldier, to admit an unarmed representative of the enemy in order to hear his terms, without telling me." "We knew you would not want to listen," snapped Worms. "But he speaks the truth. Despite all our hard work, we are greatly outnumbered, and can expect no relief as long as the war drags on in Angland. We are nothing more than a pinprick in the foot of a huge and hostile nation. It might serve us well to negotiate while we still hold a position of some strength. You may depend upon it that we will receive no terms beyond a massacre once the city has fallen." True enough, but the Archlector is unlikely to agree. Negotiating a surrender was hardly the task for which I was appointed. "You are unusually quiet, Magister Eider. I am scarcely qualified to speak on the military aspects of such a decision, but as it turns out, his terms are generous. One thing is certain. If we refuse this offer, and the Gurkish do take the city by force, the slaughter will be terrible." She looked up at Glokta. "There will be no mercy then. All too true. On Gurkish mercy, I am the expert. So all three of you are for capitulation." They looked at each other and said nothing. "It has not occurred to you that once we surrender, they might not honor your little agreement?" "It had occurred," said Visbruck, "but they have honored their agreements before. And surely some hope," and he looked down at the tabletop, "is better than none. You have more confidence in our enemy than in me, it would seem." "Hardly that surprising. My own confidence could be higher." Glokta wiped some wet from under his eye. "I see. Then I suppose I must consider his offer. We will reconvene when our Gurkish friend returns." At sunset, he rocked his body back and winced as he pushed himself up. "You'll consider it," hissed Vitari in his ear as he limped down the hall away from the audience chamber. "You'll fucking consider it." "That's right," snapped Glokta. "I make the decisions here. Or you let those worms make them for you. We've each got our jobs. I don't tell you how to write your little reports to the Archlector. How I manage those worms is none of your concern, none of my concern." Vitari snatched hold of Glokta's arm and he tottered on his weak leg. She was stronger than she looked. A lot stronger. "I told Sult you could handle things," she snarled in his face. "If we lose the city, without so much as a fight even, it's both our heads, and my head is my concern. Cripple." "This is no time to panic," growled Glokta. "I don't want to end up floating in the docks any more than you do, but this is a delicate balance. Let them think they might get their way, then no one will make any rash moves. Not until I'm good and ready. Understand me when I say practical, that this will be the first and the last time that I explain myself to you. Now take your fucking hand off me." Her hand did not let go, rather the fingers tightened, cutting into Glokta's arm as hard as a vice. Her eyes narrowed, furious lines cut into her freckled face at their corners. Might I have misjudged her? Might she be about to cut my throat? He almost grinned at the thought, but Severard chose that moment to step out of the shadows further down the dim hall. "Look at the two of you," he murmured as he padded towards them. "It always amazes me how love blooms in the least likely places and between the least likely people." A rose, forcing its way through the stony ground. He pressed his hands to his chest. "It warms my heart. Have we got him? Of course." Soon as he stepped out of the audience chamber, Vitari's hand had gone limp and Glokta brushed it off and began to shuffle towards the cells. "Why don't you come with us?" he called over his shoulder, having to stop himself rubbing the bruised flesh on his arm. "You can put this in your next report to Sult." Shabdal Islik Barai looked considerably less majestic sitting down, particularly in a scarred, stained chair in one of the close and sweaty cells beneath the citadel. "Now isn't this better, to speak on level terms?" "Quite disconcerting, having you looming over me like that." Islik sneered and looked away, as though talking to Glokta were a task far beneath him. "A rich man harassed by beggars in the street, but we'll soon cure him of that illusion. We know we have a traitor within our walls. within the ruling council itself. Most likely one of those three worthies to whom you were just now giving your little ultimatum. You will tell me who? No response. I am merciful, exclaimed Glokta, waving his hand airily, as the ambassador himself had done but a few short minutes before. But my mercy has limits. Speak. I am here under a flag of parley, on a mission from the Emperor himself. To harm an unarmed emissary would be expressly against the rules of war. Parley? Rules of war? Glokta chuckled. Severed chuckled. Vitari chuckled. Frost was silent. Do they even have those anymore? Save that rubbish for children like Visbruck. That's not the way grown-ups play the game. Who is the traitor? I pity you, cripple. When the city falls, save your pity. You'll need it for yourself. Frost's fist scarcely made any sound as it sank into the ambassador's stomach. His eyes bulged out. His mouth hung open. He coughed a dry cough. Somewhere close to vomiting. Tried to breathe and coughed again. Strange, isn't it? Mused Glokta as he watched him struggle for air. Big men, small men, thin men, fat men, clever men, stupid men. They all respond the same to a fist in the guts. One minute you think you're the most powerful man in the world. The next you can't even breathe by yourself. Some kinds of power are nothing but tricks of the mind. Your people taught me that below your emperor's palace. There were no rules of war there, I can tell you. You know all about certain engagements and certain bridges and certain young officers, so you know that I've been just where you are now. There is one difference, however. I was helpless, but you can stop this unpleasantness at any time. You need only tell me who the traitor is, and you will be spared. Islik had got his breath back now, though a good deal of his arrogance is gone. One suspects for good. I know nothing of any traitor. Really? Your master, the Emperor, sends you here to negotiate without all the facts? Unlikely. But if it's true, you really aren't any use to me at all, are you? Islik swallowed. I know nothing of any traitor. We'll see. Frost's big white fist clubbed him in the face. It would have thrown him sideways if the albino's other fist hadn't caught his head before it fell, smashed his nose and knocked him clean over the back of the chair. Frost and Severed dragged him up between them, righted the chair and dumped him gasping into it. Vitari looked on, arms folded. All very painful, said Glokta, but pain can be put to one side if one knows that it will not last long. If it cannot last, say, past sunset. To truly break a man quickly, you have to threaten to deprive him of something. To hurt him in a way that will never heal. I should know. Gah! Squawked the ambassador, thrashing in his chair. Severed wiped his knife on the shoulder of the man's white robe, then tossed his ear onto the table. It lay there on the wood, a forlorn and bloody half-circle of flesh. Glokta stared at it. In a baking cell just like this, over the course of long months, the Emperor's servants turned me into this revolting, twisted mockery of a man. One might have hoped that the chance at doing the same to one of them, the chance at cutting out vengeance, pound for pound, would provide some dull flicker of pleasure, and yet he felt nothing. Nothing but my own pain. He winced as he stretched his leg out and felt the knee click, hissed air through his empty gums. So why do I do this? Glokta sighed. Next will come a toe, then a finger, an eye, a hand, your nose, and so on, do you see? It'll be at least an hour before you're missed, and we are quick workers. Glokta nodded at the severed ear. We could have a pile of your flesh a foot high by that time. I'll carve you until you're nothing but a tongue and a bag of guts, if that's what it takes, but I'll know who the traitor is, that I promise you. Well, do you know anything yet? The ambassador stared at him, breathing hard, dark blood running from his magnificent nose down his chin, dripping from the side of his head, speechless with shock or thinking on his next move. It hardly matters. I grow bored. Start on his hands, Frost. The albino seized hold of his wrist. Wait, wailed the ambassador. God help me. Wait. It was Worms. Corsten Dan Worms, the governor's own son. Worms. Almost too obvious. But then again, the most obvious answers are usually the right ones. That little bastard would sell his own father if he only thought that he could find a buyer, and the woman, Eider. Glokta frowned. She planned it. She planned the whole thing. Glokta sucked slowly at his empty gums. They tasted sour. An awful sense of disappointment, or an awful sense of having known all along. She was always the only one with the brains, or the guts, or the resources for treason. A shame, but we know better than to hope for happy endings. Eider and Worms, muttered Glokta. Worms and Eider, our sordid little mystery comes to a close. He looked up at Frost. You know what to do. Chapter 19, Long Odds. The hill rose out of the grass, a round, even cone like a thing man-made. Strange, this one great mound standing out in the midst of the level plain. Pharaoh did not trust it. Weathered stones stood in a rough circle around its top, and scattered about the slopes, some up on end, some lying on their sides, the smallest no more than knee-high, the biggest twice as tall as a man. Dark, bare stones, standing defiant against the wind. Ancient, cold, angry. Pharaoh frowned at them. It felt as though they frowned back. "What is this place?" asked Nine Fingers. Quay shrugged. "Old is what this place is, terribly old. Older than the empire itself. Built before the time of Eus, perhaps, when devils roamed the earth." He grinned. "Built by devils, for all I know. Who can say? Some temple to forgotten gods. Some tomb." "Our tomb," whispered Pharaoh. "What? Good place to stop," she said out loud. "Get a look across the plain." Nine Fingers frowned up at it. "All right, we stop." Pharaoh stood on one of the stones, hands on hips, staring out across the plain through narrowed eyes. The wind tore at the grass and made waves from it, like the waves on the sea. It tore at the great clouds, too, twisting them, ripping them open, dragging them through the sky. It lashed at Pharaoh's face, nipped at her eyes, but she ignored it. Damn wind, just like always. Nine Fingers stood beside her, squinting into the cold sun. "Anything out there?" "We are followed." They were far away, but she could see them. Tiny dots in the far distance. Tiny riders moving on the ocean of grass. Nine Fingers grimaced. "You sure?" "Yes. You surprised?" "No." He gave up looking and rubbed at his eyes. "Bad news is never a surprise, just a disappointment. I count 13. You can count 'em? I can't even see 'em. They're coming for us." She raised her arms. "You see anything else out here? Might be that laughing bastard Phineas found some more friends. Shit." He looked down at the cart, drawn up at the base of the hill. "We cannot outrun them." "No." She curled her lip. "You could ask the spirits for their opinion, so they could tell us what. That we're fucked." Silence for a moment. "Better to wait and fight them here. Bring the cart up to the top. At least we've got a hill, and a few rocks to hide behind. That's what I was thinking. Gives us some time to prepare the ground." "That's what I was thinking. Gives us some time to prepare the ground. All right, we'd best get to it." The point of the shovel bit into the ground with the sharp scrape of metal on earth. An all too familiar sound. Digging pits and digging graves. What was the difference? Pharaoh had dug graves for all kinds of people. Companions, or as close as she had come to companions. Friends, or as close as she had come to friends. A lover or two, if you could call them that. Bandits, killers, slaves, whoever hated the Gurkish. Whoever hid in the Badlands, for whatever reason. Spade up and spade down. When the fighting is over, you dig. If you are still alive, you gather up the bodies in a line. You dig the graves in a row. You dig for your fallen comrades. Your slashed, your punctured, your hacked, and your broken comrades. You dig as deep as you can be bothered. You dump them in. You cover them up. They rot away and are forgotten, and you go on alone. That's the way it's always been. But here, on this strange hill in the middle of this strange country, there was still time. Still a chance for the comrades to live. That was the difference. And for all her scorn, and her scowls, and her anger, she clung to it as she clung to the spade, desperate tight. Strange how she never stopped hoping. "You dig well," said Nine Fingers. She squinted up at him, standing over her at the edge of the pit. "Lots of practice." She dug the spade into the earth beside the hole, planted her hands on the sides and jumped out, sat on the edge with her legs hanging down. Her shirt was stuck to her with sweat. Her face was running with it. She wiped her forehead with her dirty hand. He handed her the water skin, and she took it from him, pulled the stopper out with her teeth. How long do we have? She sucked a mouthful out of the skin and worked it round, spat it out. Depends how hard they go. She took another mouthful and swallowed. They are going hard now. They keep that up. They could be on us late tonight, or maybe dawn tomorrow. She handed the skin back. Dawn tomorrow. Then fingers slowly pushed the stopper back in. 13, you said, eh? 13, and 4 of us. 5, if the navigator comes to help. 9 fingers scratched at his jaw. Not very likely. That apprentice any use in a fight. 9 fingers winced. Not much. How about Luther? I'd be surprised if he's ever thrown a fist in anger, let alone a blade. Pharaoh nodded. 13 against 2, then. Long odds. Very. He took a deep breath and stared down into the pit. If you had a mind to run, I can't say I'd blame you. Huh, she snorted. Strange, but she hadn't even thought about it. Ooh, stick. See how it turns out. All right. Good. Can't say I don't need you. The wind rustled in the grass and sighed against the stones. There were things that should be said at a time like this, Pharaoh guessed, but she did not know what. She had never had much talk in her. One thing. If I die, you bury me. She held her hand out to him. Deal? He raised an eyebrow at it. Done. It was a long time, she realized, since she touched another person without the purpose of hurting them. It was a strange feeling, his hand gripped in hers, his fingers tight round hers, his palm pressed against hers. Warm. He nodded at her. She nodded at him. Then they let go. What if we both die? He said. She shrugged. Then the crows can pick us clean. After all, what's the difference? Not much, he muttered, starting off down the slope. Not much. Chapter 20. The Road to Victory. West stood by a clump of stunted trees, in the cutting wind, on the high ground above the river Cumna, and watched the long column move. More accurately, he watched it not move, the neat blocks of the King's Own. Up at the head of Prince Ladisla's army, marched smartly enough. You could tell them from their armor, glinting in the odd ray of pale sun that broke through the ragged clouds, from the bright uniforms of their officers, from the red and golden standards snapping at the front of each company. They were already across the river, formed up in good order, a stark contrast with the chaos on the other side. The levies had started eagerly, early that morning, no doubt relieved to be leaving the miserable camp behind. But it hadn't been an hour before a man here or a man there, older than the others, or worse shod, had started to lag, and the column had too, grown ragged. Men slipped and stumbled in the half-frozen muck, cursing and barging into their neighbors, boots tripping on the boots of the man in front. The battalions had twisted, stretched, turned from neat blocks into shapeless blobs, merged with the units in front and behind, until the column moved in great ripples, one group hurrying forward while the next was still, like the segments of some monstrous, filthy earthworm. As soon as they reached the bridge, they had lost all semblance of order. The ragged companies squeezed into that narrow space, shoving and grunting, tired and bad-tempered. Those waiting behind pressed in tighter and tighter, impatient to be across so they could rest, slowing everything down still further with the weight of their bodies. Then a cart, which had no business being there in any case, had lost a wheel halfway across, and the sluggish flow of men over the bridge had become a trickle. No one seemed to know how to move it, or who to get to fix it, and contented themselves with clambering over it, or slithering around it, and holding up the thousands behind. Quite a press had built up in the mud on this side of the fast-flowing water. Men barged and grumbled shoulder to shoulder, spears sticking up into the air at all angles, surrounded by shouting officers and an ever-increasing detritus of rubbish and discarded gear. Behind them the great snake of shambling men continued its spastic forward movement, feeding ever more soldiers into the confusion before the bridge. There was not the slightest evidence that anyone had even thought about trying to make them stop, let alone succeeded. All this in column, under no pressure from the enemy, and with a half-decent road to march on. West dreaded to imagine trying to maneuver them in a battle line, through trees or over broken ground. He jammed his tired eyes shut, rubbed at them with his fingers. But when he opened them, the horrifying, hilarious spectacle was still there before him. He hardly knew whether to laugh or cry. He heard the sound of hooves on the rise behind him. Lieutenant Jalenhorm, big and solid in his saddle, short on imagination perhaps, but a fine rider and a trustworthy man. A good choice for the task that West had in mind. Lieutenant Jalenhorm reporting, sir. The big man turned in his saddle and looked down towards the river. Looks like they're having some trouble on the bridge. Doesn't it just? Only the start of our troubles, I fear. Jalenhorm grinned down. I understand we have the advantage of numbers and of surprise, as far as numbers go, maybe. Surprise? West gestured down at the men milling around on the bridge, heard the vague, desperate shouts of their officers. This rabble. A blind man would hear us coming from 10 miles distance. A blind and a deaf one would probably smell us before we were halfway to battle order. We'll be all day just getting across the river. And that's hardly the worst of our shortcomings. In the area of command, I fear, the gulf between us and our enemy could not possibly be wider. The prince lives in a dream, and his staff exist only to keep him there, at any price. But surely, the price could be our lives. Jalenhorm frowned. Come on, West. I hardly wanted to be going into battle with that thought first on my mind. You won't be going? I won't. You will pick out 6 good men from your company with spare mounts. You will ride as hard as possible for Ostenholm, then north to Lord Marshal Burr's camp. West reached into his coat and pulled out his letter. You will give him this. You will inform him that Bethard is already behind him with the greater part of his strength, and that Prince Ladisla has most ill-advisedly decided to cross the River Cumnor and give the Northmen battle, directly against the Marshal's orders. West clenched his teeth. Bethard will see us coming from miles away. We are handing the choice of the ground to our enemy, so that Prince Ladisla can appear bold. Boldness is the best policy in war, apparently. West, surely it's not that bad. When you reach Marshal Burr, tell him that Prince Ladisla has almost certainly been defeated, quite possibly destroyed, and the road to Ostenholm left open. He'll know what to do. Jalenhorm stared down at the letter, reached out to take it, then paused. Colonel, I really wish that you'd send someone else. I should fight. Your fighting cannot possibly make any real difference, Lieutenant, but your carrying this message might. There is no sentiment in this, believe me. I have no more important task than this one, and you are the man I trust to get it done. Do you understand your orders? The big man swallowed, then he took the letter, undid a button, and slid it carefully down inside his coat. Of course, sir. I am honored to carry it. He began to turn his horse. There is one more thing. West took a deep breath. If I should get myself killed, when this is over, could you carry a message to my sister? Come on. There'll be no need for. I hope to live, believe me, but this is war. Not everyone will. If I don't come back, just tell Artie he thought about it for a moment. Just tell her I'm sorry, that's all. Of course. But I hope you'll tell her yourself. So do I. Good luck. West held out his hand. Jalenhorm reached down and squeezed it in his own. And to you, he spurred his mount down the rise, away from the river. West watched him go for a minute. Then he took a deep breath and set off in the other direction, towards the bridge. Someone had to get that damn column moving again. Chapter 21. Necessary Evils. The sun was half a shimmering golden disk beyond the land walls, throwing orange light into the hallway down which Glokta shuffled, practical frost looming at his shoulder. Through the windows as he passed painfully by, he could see the buildings of the city casting long shadows up towards the rock. He could almost tell, at each window that he came to, that the shadows were longer and less distinct. The sun was dimmer and colder. Soon it would be gone. Soon it will be night. He paused for a moment before the doors to the audience chamber, catching his breath, letting the ache in his leg subside, licking at his empty gums. Give me the bag, then. Frost handed him the sack. Put one white hand against the doors. Eurethi, he mumbled. Ready as I'll ever be. Let's get on with it. General Visbruck was sitting stiff in his well-starched uniform, jowls bulging slightly over his high collar, hands plucking nervously at each other. Corsten Dan Wurms was doing his best to look nonchalant, but his darting tongue betrayed his anxiety. Magister Eider was sitting upright, hands clasped on the table before her, face stern, all business. A necklace of large rubies glowed with the last embers of the setting sun. Didn't take her too long to find some more jewels, I see. There was one more member of the gathering, and he showed not the slightest sign of nerves. Nikomo Koska was lounging against the far wall, not far behind his employer, arms crossed over his black breastplate. Glokta noted that he had a sword at his hip and a long dagger at the other. "What's he doing here?" "This concerns everyone in the city," said Eider calmly. "It is too important a decision for you to make alone. So he's going to ensure that you get a fair say, eh?" Koska shrugged and examined his dirty fingernails. "And what of the writ, signed by all 12 chairs on the closed council? Your paper will not save us from the Emperor's vengeance if the Gurkish take the city." "I see. So you have it in mind to defy me, to defy the Archlector, to defy the Archlector, to defy the king." "I have it in mind to hear out the Gurkish emissary, and to consider the facts." "Very well," said Glokta. He stepped forwards and upended the bag. "Give him your ear." Eilik's head dropped onto the table with a hollow clonking sound. It had no expression to speak of, beyond an awful slackness, eyes open and staring off in different directions, tongue lolling slightly. It rolled awkwardly along the beautiful tabletop, leaving an uneven curve of bloody smears on the brightly polished wood, and came to rest, face up, just in front of General Visbruck. A touch theatrical, perhaps, but dramatic. "You'd have to give me that. No one can be left in any doubt as to my level of commitment." Visbruck gulped down at the bloody head on the table before him, his mouth slowly falling further and further open. He started up from his seat and stumbled back, his chair clattering over on the tiles. He raised a shaking finger to point at Glokta. "You're mad! You're mad! There'll be no mercy for anyone! Every man, woman, and child in Dagaska. If the city falls now, there's no hope for any of us." Glokta smiled his toothless smile. "Then I suggest that every one of you commits themselves wholeheartedly to ensuring that the city does not fall." He looked over at Corsten Danverms. "Unless it's already too late for that, eh? Unless you've already sold the city to the Gurkish. And you can't go back." Worm's eyes flickered to the door, to Koska, to the horrified General Visbruck, to Frost, hulking ominous in the corner, and finally to Magister Ida, still sitting steely calm and composed. "And our little conspiracy is jerked from the shadows." "He knows," screamed Worms, shoving back his chair and stumbling up, taking a step towards the windows. "Clearly he knows. Then do something, damn it." "I already have," said Ida. "By now, Koska's men will have seized the land walls, bridged your channel, and opened the gates to the Gurkish. The docks, the great temple, and even the citadel itself are also in their hands." There was a faint rattling beyond the door. "I do believe that I can hear them now, just outside." "I am sorry, Superior Glokta. Indeed I am. You have done everything His Eminence could have expected, and more. But the Gurkish will already be pouring into the city. You see that further resistance is pointless." Glokta looked up at Koska. "May I retort?" The Styrian gave a small smile, a stiff bow. "Most kind. I hate to disappoint you, but the gates are in the hands of Hadish Kadia, and several of his most committed priests. He said that he would open them to the Gurkish. What was his phrase? When God himself commanded it. Do you have a divine visitation planned?" It was plain from Eider's face that she had not. "As for the citadel, it has been seized by the Inquisition, for the safety of His Majesty's loyal subjects, of course. Those are my practicals that you can hear outside. As for Master Koska's mercenaries, at their posts on the walls, superior, as ordered." The Styrian snapped his heels together and gave an impeccable salute. "They stand ready to repel any assault by the Gurkish." He grinned down at Eider. "I do apologize that I must leave your service at such a crucial time, Magister. But you understand that I had a better offer." There was a stunned pause. Visbruck could hardly have looked more flabbergasted if he had been struck by lightning. Worms stared around, wild-eyed. He took one more step back and Frost took a stride towards him. Magister Eider's face had drained of color. "And so the chase ends, and the foxes are at bay. You should hardly be surprised." Glokta settled back comfortably in his chair. "Nikomo Koska's disloyalty is a legend throughout the circle of the world. There's hardly a land under the sun in which he hasn't betrayed an employer." The Styrian smiled and bowed once more. "It is your wealth," muttered Eider, "not his disloyalty that surprises me. Where did you get it?" Glokta grinned. "The world is full of surprises." "You fucking stupid bitch," screamed Verms. His steel was only halfway out before Frost's white fist crunched into his jaw and flung him senseless against the wall. Almost at the same moment, the doors crashed open, and Vitari burst into the room, half a dozen practicals behind her, weapons at the ready. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Actually, we're just finishing up." "Take out the rubbish, would you, Frost?" The albino's fingers closed around Verm's ankle and hauled him bodily across the floor and out of the audience chamber. Eider watched his slack face slide across the tiles, then looked up at Glokta. "What now? Now the cells, then." "Then we'll see." He snapped his fingers at the practicals, jerked his thumb towards the door. Two of them tramped round the table, seized the Queen of Merchants by her elbows, and bundled her impassively out of the room. "So," asked Glokta, looking over at Visbruck, "does anyone else wish to accept the ambassador's offer of surrender?" The general, who had been standing silently the whole time, snapped his mouth shut, took a deep breath, and stood to stiff attention. "I am a simple soldier. Of course, I will obey any order from His Majesty or His Majesty's chosen representative. If the order is to hold Dagazka to the last man, I will give the last drop of my blood to do it. I assure you that I knew nothing of any plot. I acted rashly, perhaps, but at all times honestly in what I felt were the best interests of—" Glokta waved his hand. "To lose any more might make me look greedy. The Gurkish will no doubt make their assault at first light. You should look to our defenses, General." Visbruck closed his eyes, swallowed, wiped some sweat from his forehead. "You will not regret your faith in me, Superior. I trust that I will not. Go." The general hurried from the room, as though worried that Glokta might change his mind, and the rest of the practicals followed him. Vitari bent and lifted Verm's fallen chair and slid it carefully back under the table. "A neat job." She nodded slowly to herself. "Very neat. I'm happy to say I was right about you all along." Glokta snorted. "Your approval is worth less to me than you can ever know." Her eyes smiled at him above her mask. "I didn't say that I approved. I just said that it was neat," and she turned and sauntered out into the hallway that only left him and Casca. The mercenary leaned against the wall, arms folded carelessly across his breastplate, regarding Glokta with a faint smile. He had not moved the whole time. "You'd do well in Styria, I think. Very ruthless. Is that the word? Anyway," and he gave a flamboyant shrug, "I look forward very much to serving with you. Until such time as someone offers you more, Casca?" The mercenary waved a hand at the severed head on the table. "Would you like me to do something with that? Stick it on the battlements of the land walls, somewhere it can be easily seen. Let the Gurkish understand the strength of our resolve." Casca clicked his tongue. "Heads on spikes, eh?" He dragged the head off the table by its long beard. "Never goes out of fashion." The doors clicked shut behind him, and Glokta was left alone in the audience chamber. He rubbed at his stiff neck, stretched his stiff leg out beneath the bloody table. A good day's work, all in all. But the day is over now. Outside the tall windows, the sun had finally set over Dagazka. The sky was dark. Chapter 22. Among the stones. The first traces of dawn were creeping over the plain. A glimmer of light on the undersides of the towering clouds, and along the edges of the ancient stones, a muddy flare on the eastern horizon. A sight a man rarely saw, that first grey glow, or one that Jezzel had rarely seen anyway. At home he would have been safely in his quarters now, sleeping soundly in a warm bed. None of them had slept last night. They had spent the long, cold hours in silence, sitting in the wind, peering into the dark for shapes out on the plain, and waiting for the dawn. Then fingers frowned at the rising sun. Almost time. Soon they'll be coming. "Right," muttered Jezzel numbly. "Listen to me now. Stay here, and watch the cart. There's plenty of 'em, and more than likely some will get round the back of us. That's why you are here, you understand?" Jezzel swallowed. His throat was tight with the tension. All he could think about was how unfair it was. How unfair that he should die so young. "All right, me and her will be round the front of the hill there and around the stones. Most of 'em will come up that way, I reckon. You get in trouble, you shout for us. But if we don't come, well, do what you can. Might be we're busy. Might be we're dead." "I'm scared," said Jezzel. He hadn't meant to say it, but it hardly seemed to matter now. Ninfingers only nodded, though. And me were all scared. Pharaoh had a fierce smile on her face as she tightened the straps of her quiver around her chest, pulled the buckle on her sword belt one notch further, dragged on her archery guard, and worked her fingers, twanged at her bowstring, everything neat and quick and ready for violence. While she prepared for a fight that would most likely be the death of them all, she looked as Jezal might have done dressing for a night round the taverns of Adua, yellow eyes shining, excited in the half-light, as if she couldn't wait to get started. He had never seen her look happy before. "She doesn't look scared," he said. Ninefingers frowned over at her. "Well, maybe not her, but she's not an example I'd want to follow." He watched her for a moment. Sometimes when someone lives in danger for too long, the only time they feel alive is when death's breathing on their shoulder. The sight of the buckle on his own sword belt, of the grips of his own steels, so proudly polished, made him feel sick now. He swallowed again. Damn it. But his mouth had never been so full of spit. "Try to think about something else." "Like what?" "Whatever gets you through it. You got family. A father, 2 brothers. I don't know how much they like me. Shit on them then. You got children? No wife? No?" Jezal grimaced. He had done nothing with his life but play cards and make enemies. No one would miss him. A lover then. "Don't tell me there ain't a girl waiting." Well, maybe, but he did not doubt that Ardi would already have found someone else. She had never seemed overly sentimental. Perhaps he should have offered to marry her when he had the chance. At least then someone might have wept for him. "What about you?" he mumbled. "What? A family?" Ninefingers frowned, rubbing grimly at the stump of his middle finger. "I did have one, and now I've got another. You don't pick your family, you take what you're given and you make the best of it." He pointed at Pharaoh, then at Kwai. "You see her, and him, and you?" He slapped his hand down on Jezal's shoulder. "That's my family now, and I don't plan on losing a brother today, you understand?" Jezal nodded slowly. "You don't pick your family. You make the best of it. Ugly, stupid, stinking, strange. It hardly seemed to matter now." Ninefingers held out his hand, and Jezal gripped it in his own as hard as he could. The Northman grinned. "Luck then, Jezal. And to you." Pharaoh knelt beside one of the pitted stones, her bow in one hand, an arrow nocked and ready. The wind made patterns in the tall grass on the plain below, whipped at the shorter grass on the slope of the hill, plucked at the flights of the 7 arrows stuck into the earth in front of her in a row. 7 arrows was all she had left. Nothing like enough. She watched them ride up to the base of the hill. She watched them climb from their horses, staring upwards. She watched them tighten the buckles on their scuffed leather armor, ready their weapons. Spears, swords, shields, a bow or 2. She counted them. 13. She had been right, but that wasn't much of a comfort. She recognized Phineas, laughing and pointing up at the stones. Bastard. She would shoot him first if she got the chance, but there was no point risking a shot at this range. They would be coming soon. Crossing the open ground, struggling uphill. She could shoot them then. She could shoot them then. They began to spread out, peering up at the stones over the tops of their shields, their boots rustling in the long grass below. They had not seen her yet. There was one at the front without a shield, pounding up the slope with a fierce grin on his face, a bright sword in each hand. She drew the string back, unhurried, felt it dig reassuringly into her chin. The arrow took him in the center of his chest, right through his leather breastplate. He sank to his knees, wincing and gasping. He pushed himself up with one of his swords, took a lurching step. Her second arrow stuck into his body just above the first, and he fell to his knees again, dribbled bloody spit onto the hillside, then rolled onto his back. But there were plenty more, and still coming on. The nearest one was hunched down behind a big shield, pressing slowly up the slope with it held in front of him, trying not to expose a single inch of flesh. Her arrow thudded into the edge of the heavy wood. "Sss," she hissed, snatching another shaft from the earth. She drew back the string again, taking careful aim. Her next shaft arced through the air and caught him cleanly through the neck, just above the shield rim. Blood bubbled down his skin. His eyes went wide and he toppled backwards, the shield sliding down the slope after him with her wasted arrow sticking from it. but that one had taken too long and too many shafts. They were well up the hillside now, halfway to the first stones, zigzagging left and right. She snatched her last 2 arrows from the earth and slithered through the grass, up the slope. That was all she could do for now. Fingers would have to look after himself. Loudon waited, his back pressed against the stone, trying to keep his breathing quiet. He watched Pharaoh crawl further up the hill, away from him. Shit, he muttered. Outnumbered and in trouble, yet again. He had known this would happen from the first moment he took charge. It always did. Well, he'd fought his way out of scrapes before, and he would fight his way out of this one now. Say one thing for Loudon Ninefingers. Say he's a fighter. He heard hurrying footsteps in the grass, and breathless grunting. A man laboring up the hill just to the left of the stone. Loudon held his sword by his right side, fingered the hard metal of the grip, clenched his jaws together. He saw the point of the man's spear wobble past, then his shield. He stepped out with a fighting roar, swinging the sword round in a great wide circle. It chopped deep into the man's shoulder and opened a huge gash across his chest, spraying blood into the air, lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing down the hill, flopping over and over. Still alive! Loudon panted as he sprinted away up the slope. A spear whistled past and sank into the turf beside him as he slid in behind the next stone. A poor effort, but they'd have plenty more. He peered round the edge. He saw quick shapes rushing from rock to rock. He licked his lips and hefted the maker's sword. There was blood on the dark blade now, blotted on the silver letter near the hilt. But there was much more work to do. He came up the hillside towards her, peering over the top of his shield, ready to block an arrow if it came. No way to get at him from here. He was watching too hard. She ducked away behind the stone and slipped into the shallow trench she had dug. Started crawling. She came up to the far end, just behind another great rock. She edged round behind it and peered out. She could see him, his side to her, creeping up carefully towards the stone where she had been hiding. It seemed that God was feeling generous today. Towards her, if not towards him. The shaft buried itself in his side, just above his waist. Right through the heart, she guessed, from the way he fell. The arrows were gone. Pharaoh tossed her bow away and drew out the Gurkish sword. It was time to get close. Loudon stepped round one of the stones and found himself looking straight into a face, close enough almost to feel its breath on his cheek. A young face. A good-looking one, with clean skin, and a sharp nose, wide-open brown eyes. Loudon smashed his forehead into it. The head snapped back and the young man stumbled. Enough time for Loudon to pull his knife from his belt with his left hand. Brown Eye's head came up again, blood bubbling from his broken nose, snarling as he pulled back his sword arm for a thrust. Loudon grunted as he stabbed the knife into the man's body, once, twice, 3 times. Hard, fast, underhand thrusts that half lifted him off his feet. Blood leaked out from the holes in his guts and over Loudon's hands. He groaned, dropped his sword, started to slide down the stone, his legs giving way, and Loudon watched him go. A choice between killing and dying is no choice at all. You have to be realistic about these things. The man sat in the grass, holding his bloody stomach. He looked up at Loudon. "Gah!" he grunted. "Gurr! What? Nothing else?" His brown eyes were glassy. "Come on," screamed Pharaoh. "Come on, you fucking son of a whore." She squatted on the grass, ready to spring. He did not speak her language, but he got the gist. His spear arced, spinning through the air. Not a bad throw. She moved to the side, and it clattered away into the stones. She laughed at him, and he came charging, a big, bald bull of a man. 15 strides away, and she could see the grain on the handle of his axe. 12 strides, and she could see the creases on his snarling face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, across the bridge of his nose. 8 strides, and she could see the scratches on his leather breastplate. 5 strides, and he raised his axe high. "Fa!" he squealed as the grass in front of her suddenly collapsed beneath his feet, and he pitched flailing into one of the pits, the weapon flying from his hand. Should have watched where he stepped. She sprang forward hungrily, swinging the sword without looking. He yelled as the heavy blade bit deep into his shoulder, squealed and gibbered, trying to get away, scrambling at the loose earth. The sword chopped a hole in the top of his head, and he gurgled, thrashed, slid down into the bottom of the pit. The grave. His grave. He did not deserve one, but never mind. She could drag him out later and let him rot on the hillside. He was a big bastard, this one. A great fat giant of a man, half a head taller than Lodgen. He had a huge club, big as half a tree, but he threw it around easily enough, shouting and roaring like a madman, little eyes rolling with fury in his pudgy face. Lodgen dodged and tottered between the stones. Not easy, trying to keep one eye on the ground behind him and one on that huge flailing tree limb. Not easy. Something was bound to go wrong. Lodgen stumbled on something. The boot of the brown-eyed man he'd killed a minute before. There's justice for you. He righted himself just in time to see the giant's fist crack him in the mouth. He waddled, dizzy, spitting blood. He saw the club swinging at him and he leaped back. Not far enough. The very tip of the great lump of wood clipped Lodgen's thigh and nearly dragged him off his feet. He staggered against one of the stones, squawking and dribbling and grimacing from the pain, fumbled his sword and nearly stabbed himself with it, snatched it up just in time to tumble and fall on his back as the club smashed away a great chunk of off rock beside him. The giant lifted his club high over his head, bellowing like a bull. A fearsome move, perhaps, but not a clever one. Lodgen sat up and stabbed him through his gut, the dark blade sliding right up to the hilt almost clean through his back. The club dropped from his hands and thudded on the turf behind him, but with some last desperate effort he leaned down, grabbed hold of a fistful of Lodgen's shirt, and hauled him close, roaring and baring his bloody teeth. He started to raise his great ham of a fist. Lodgen pulled the knife out of his boot and rammed the blade into the side of the giant's neck. He looked surprised for just a moment. Then blood dribbled from his mouth and down his chin. He let go of Lodgen's shirt, stumbled back, spun slowly round, bounced off one of the stones and crashed on his face. Seemed that Lodgen's father had been right. You can never have too many knives. Pharaoh heard the bowstring, but by then it was too late. She felt the arrow pierce her through the back of her shoulder, and when she looked down she could see the point sticking out the front of her shirt. It made her arm numb. Dark blood leaked out into the dirty cloth. She hissed to herself as she ducked behind one of the stones. She still had the sword, though, and one good arm to use it. She slithered around the rock, the rough surface scraping at her back, listening. She could hear the archer's footfalls in the grass, searching for her, the soft ringing as he drew a blade. She saw him now, his back to her, looking right and left. She jumped at him with the sword, but he turned in time and caught the blade on his own. They crashed down into the grass together and rolled over in a tangle. He scrambled up, thrashing and screaming, clutching at his bloody face. The arrow sticking from her shoulder had stabbed him through the eye as they struggled on the floor. Lucky for her. She sprang forward, and the Gurkish sword chopped his foot out from under him. He screamed again, falling onto his side, mangled leg flopping. He was just pushing himself up when the curved blade hacked halfway through his neck from behind. Pharaoh scrambled through the grass, away from the body, her left arm hanging nearly useless, her right fist gripped tight around the grip of the sword, looking for more work. Phineas moved this way and that, dancing around, light on his feet. He had a big square shield on his left arm, a short, thick sword in the other hand. He twirled it around as he moved, watery sun flashing on the edge, grinning all the while, long hair flapping round his face in the wind. Lodgen was too tired to move much, so he just stood there and caught his breath, the Maker's sword hanging down by his side. "What happened to your sorcerer?" grinned Phineas. "No tricks this time, eh? No tricks. Well, you've led us a merry dance, I'll give you that. But we got here in the end." "Got where?" Lodgen looked down at the corpse of the brown-eyed man, sat against the stone beside him. "If this was what you wanted, you could have killed yourselves days ago, and saved me the trouble." Phineas frowned. "You'll find I'm made of different stuff from these fools, Northmen." "We're all made of the same stuff." "I don't need to carve another body to find that out." Lodgen stretched his neck out, hefted the Maker's sword in his hand. "But if you're set on showing me your contents, I'll not disappoint you." "All right then." Phineas started forward. "If you're that keen to see hell." He came on fast and hard, the shield up in front of him, herding Lodgen through the stones, jabbing and chopping quick with the sword. Lodgen stumbled back, short of breath, looking for an opening but not finding one. The shield barged into his chest and knocked his breath out. pressed him back. He tried to dodge away, but he lurched on his weak leg, and the short sword darted out and caught him across the arm. "Gah!" squawked Logan, staggering against a stone, drops of blood pattering from the cut into the grass. "One to me," chuckled Phineas, dancing sideways and waving his sword around. Logan stood and watched him, breathing hard. The shield was a big one, and this smiling bastard used it well. Gave him quite the advantage. He was quick, no doubt, quicker than Logan now, with a bad leg, a cut arm, and a thick head from a punch in the mouth. Where was the bloody 9 when you wanted him? Logan spat on the ground. This fight he'd have to win alone. He edged back, stooping more and panting harder than he needed to, letting his arm dangle as if it was useless, blood dripping from his limp fingers, blinking and wincing. He edged back past the stones into a space with more room. A nice, wide space where he could get a decent swing. Phineas followed him, shield held up in front. "That it?" He grinned as he came on. "Already fading, eh? I can't say I'm not disappointed. I was hoping for a Logan roared, springing suddenly forward and lifting the Maker's sword above his head in both hands. Phineas scrambled back, but not quite far enough. The grey blade tore a chunk from the corner of his shield, sliced clean through and chopped deep into the side of one of the stones with a mighty clang, sending chips of rock spinning. The impact nearly tore the sword from Logan's hands, sent him flailing sideways. Phineas groaned. Blood was running from a cut on his shoulder, a cut right through his leather armor and into the flesh. The tip of the sword must have gashed him as it passed. Not deep enough to kill, unfortunately, but deep enough to make the point all right. It was Logan's turn to grin. That it, they moved at the same moment. The two blades clanged together, but Logan's grip was the stronger. Phineas' sword twittered as it spun from his hand and away down the hillside. He gasped, snatching at his belt for a dagger. But before he could get there, Logan was on him, growling and grunting as he chopped mindlessly away at the shield, hacking great scars in the wood and sending splinters flying, driving Phineas stumbling away. One last blow crashed into the shield, and he staggered from the force of it, tripped over the corner of a fallen stone, poking through the grass, and tumbled onto his back. Logan gritted his teeth and swung the Maker's sword down. It sliced clean through the greave on Phineas' and took his foot off just above the ankle, splattering blood into the grass. He dragged himself backwards, started to scramble up, shrieked as he tried to put his weight on his missing foot, dropped onto the stump, and sprawled on his back again, coughing and groaning. "My foot," he wailed. "Put it out of your mind," growled Logan, kicking the dead thing out of his way and stepping forward. "Wait," gurgled Phineas, shoving himself back through the grass with his good leg towards one of the standing stones, leaving a bloody trail behind him. "For what? Just wait!" He dragged himself up the rock, hopped on his remaining foot, cringing away. "Wait!" he screamed. Logan's sword caught the inside rim of the shield, tore the straps away from Phineas' limp arm and flung it bouncing down the slope on its chewed-up edge. Phineas gave a desperate wail and pulled out his knife, poised himself on his one good leg to lunge. Logan chopped a great gash in his chest. Blood sprayed out and showered down his breastplate. His eyes bulged, he opened his mouth wide, but all that came out was a gentle wheeze. The dagger dropped from his fingers and fell silently into the grass. He slid sideways and dropped onto his face. Back to the mud with that. Logan stood and blinked and breathed. The cut on his arm was starting to sting like fire. His leg was aching. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. "Still alive," he muttered to himself. "Still alive." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Shit!" he gasped. The others. He started to hobble back up the slope towards the summit. The arrow in her shoulder had made her slow. Her shirt was wet with blood and she was getting thirsty and stiff and sluggish. He slid out from behind one of the stones, and before she knew it, he was on her. There was no room to use the sword any longer, so she let it drop. She made a grab for her knife, but he caught her by the wrist, and he was strong. He threw her back against the stone, and her head cracked against it, made her dizzy for a moment. She could see a muscle trembling under his eye, the black pores on his nose, the fibers standing out on his neck. She twisted and struggled, but his weight bore down on her. She snarled and spat, but even Pharaoh's strength was not endless. Her arms trembled, her elbows bent. His hand found her throat, and tightened round it. He muttered something through clenched teeth, squeezing and squeezing. She could not breathe any longer, and the strength was ebbing out of her. Then, through her half-closed eyes, she saw a hand slither round his face from behind, a big, pale, three-fingered hand caked with dry blood. A big, pale forearm followed it, and another from the other side, folding his head tightly. He wriggled and struggled, but there was no escape. The thick sinews flexed and squirmed under the skin, and the pale fingers dug into his face, dragging his head back and to the side, further and further. He let go of Pharaoh, and she sagged against the stone, sucking in air. He scrabbled uselessly at the arms with his fingernails. He made a long, strange hissing sound as his head was twisted relentlessly round. Crunch. The arms let go and he crumpled on the floor, head hanging. Nina fingers stood behind. There was dry blood across his face, blood on his hands, blood soaked through his torn clothes. His face was pale and twitchy, streaked with dirt and sweat. "You all right?" "About like you," she croaked. Any left, he put one hand on the stone beside her and leaned over, spat blood out onto the grass. "Don't know, couple maybe." She squinted up at the summit of the hill. "Up there, could be. She bent and snatched the curved sword up from the grass, started to limp up the slope, using it like a crutch. She heard Nine Fingers struggling after her. For some minutes now, Jezzel had heard occasional shouting, screaming, and clashing of metal on metal. Everything was vague and distant, filtering to his ears through the blustering wind across the hilltop. He had no clue what was happening beyond the circle of stones at the hill's summit, and he was not sure he wanted to know. He strode up and down, his hands opening and closing, and all the while Quai sat on the cart, looking down at Bayaz, silent and infuriatingly calm. It was then that he saw it, a man's head, rising up over the brow of the hill between two tall stones. Next came his shoulders, then his chest. Another appeared not far away. A second man. Two killers, advancing up the slope towards him. One of them had piggy eyes and a heavy jaw. The other was thinner, with a tangled thatch of fair hair. They moved cautiously up onto the summit of the hill until they stood within the circle of stones, examining Jezzel and Quai and the cart with no particular urgency. Jezzel had never fought two men at once before. He had never fought to the death before either, but he tried not to think about that. This was simply a fencing match. Nothing new. He swallowed and drew his steels. The metal rang reassuringly as it slid out. The familiar weight in his palms was a small comfort. The two men stared at him, and Jezzel stared back, trying to remember what Nine Fingers had told him. Try to look weak. That, at least, did not present much difficulty. He did not doubt that he appeared suitably scared. It was the most he could do not to turn and run. He backed slowly away towards the cart, licking his lips with a nervousness that was anything but feigned. Never take an enemy lightly. He looked them over, these two. Strong-looking men, well-equipped. They both wore armor of rigid leather, carried square shields. One had a short sword, the other an axe with a heavy blade. Deadly-looking weapons, well-worn. Taking them lightly was hardly his problem. They spread out, moving round to either side of him, and he watched them. The time comes to act. You strike with no backward glances. The one on Jezzel's left came at him. He saw the man snarl, saw him rear up, saw the great unwieldy backswing. It was an absurdly simple matter for him to step out of the way and let it thud into the turf beside him. On an instinct he thrust with his short steel and buried it in the man's side up to the hilt, between his breastplate and his backplate, just under his bottom rib. Even as Jezzel was ripping the blade back, he was ducking under the other's axe and whipping his long steel across at neck height. He danced past them and spun around, steels held ready, waiting for the referee's call. The one he had stabbed staggered a step or two, wheezing and grabbing at his side. The other stood there, swaying, his piggy eyes bulging, his hand clutched to his neck. Blood began to pour out between his fingers from his slit throat. They fell almost at the same time, face down, right next to each other. Jezzel frowned at the blood on his long steel. He frowned at the two corpses he had made. Almost without thinking, he had killed two men. He should have felt guilty, but he felt numb. No, he felt proud. He felt exhilarated. He looked up at Quay, watching him calmly from the back of the cart. "I did it," he muttered, and the apprentice nodded slowly. "I did it," he shouted, waving his bloody short steel in the air. Quay frowned, and then his eyes went wide. "Behind you!" he shouted, half jumping up out of his seat. Jezzel turned, bringing up his steels, saw something moving out of the very corner of his eye. There was a mighty crunching, and his head exploded with brilliant light. Then all was darkness. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.